Chapter 711. Walking in the long, dark corridor of Wuqi's supreme tower, the shrill cries of countless venomous insects and beasts rang in his ears. From time to time, groups of oracles, maids, and guards walked past him like ghosts. All of them bowed deeply and respectfully in silence when he passed by, and no one dared to set their eyes on anything above Wuqi's belt. Deyu was a country with a strict hierarchy. And the Directorate of Celestials of Deyu was the oldest, most traditional, most conservative, and hardest piece of granite in Deyu, a country that was as boring as granite. As Wuqi walked along the corridor, some of the guards and oracles stationed at the sentry posts even held their breath, and even used mystic arts to temporarily stop their heartbeats, lest they should make the slightest sound and disturb Wuqi, King Yangqiu's favorite man. Wuqi came to the hall where King Yangqiu and the others were having fun. Even the heavy bronze door could not drown out the subtle noises coming out of the hall. With a faint smile on his face, Wuqi counted on his fingers, then slowly walked out of the supreme tower along the corridor in front of the hall. These oracles of the Directorate of Celestials really had unfathomable divine abilities. From the outside, Yugu's supreme tower seemed to be only about a mile in circumference, but its interior was extremely vast. It took Wuqi half a quarter of an hour to walk out of the secret chamber. Standing at the exit at the top of the supreme tower, he glanced at the scenery of Greenwood Plain. At the moment, the moon was hanging high in the sky, and its silvery white moonlight was sprinkling down on the shadowless greenwood. The magical ancient divine tree was emitting a faint green light, which was as warm as jade and spread for thousands of miles. Bathed in the light, the grassland looked exceptionally quiet and peaceful. Occasionally, the roars of wild beasts could be heard ringing out from the lake in the distance. It was the sound of nocturnal carnivores hunting at night. Glancing at the hundreds of oracles standing guard outside the supreme tower, Wuqi said in a deep voice, "I'm going to Greenwood Pass to take a look. If your highness asks, just give me this answer." The priests bowed silently, indicating that they had heard Wuqi's order. Under the silver moonlight, these priests, who were dressed in long black robes and even their faces were covered by cloaks, bent over like black paper-cut figures, revealing a trace of coldness and mysteriousness. Even though Wuqi was used to the behavior of these priests, he still couldn't help but shiver at this moment, and goosebumps suddenly appeared on his back. Shaking his head, Wuqi jumped down from Tong Tian Tower and landed on the ground. Wuqi quickly captured the energy fluctuation of a spirit vein. He casually took a step forward and activated the Quafu Chasing Sun step. With a twist of his body, he arrived at the exit of Greenwood Plain, a long and narrow valley sandwiched between two tall mountains. This valley was 100 miles long and connected to the outside world, and was about 300 feet wide. The two tall mountains were densely covered with countless caves and plank roads. Inside these caves, 100,000 soldiers were stationed to guard the Greenwood Plain. Wuqi waved at the sentries standing on the mountaintop, and with a flash of his body, he arrived at the other end of the valley. After passing through a thick layer of air that was as thick as glue, the path ahead suddenly opened up. In the middle of the valley stood a majestic city, brightly lit, and the night breeze carried the laughter of women and the coarse shouts of men. This majestic city was Greenwood Pass. The outer wall of this city was entirely made of metal, and was densely covered with countless talismans and restrictive spells. On the left and right sides of Greenwood Pass were tall mountains, and the two rows of high walls were built according to the terrain of the mountains. Inside the pass, all kinds of professions could be found, including wine, women, avarice, and temper. This Greenwood Pass was built for the soldiers stationed in Greenwood Plain. Every few days, soldiers would come out of Greenwood Plain to enjoy themselves in Greenwood Pass. Greenwood Plain was a vital area of Deyu, and the Greenwood divine liquid it produced was of great value. That was why an army of 100,000 was stationed here. These 100,000 soldiers were usually not allowed to leave the area within 100 miles of Greenwood Plain, and their various desires also needed to be satisfied. Greenwood Pass was built for this purpose. Originally, Greenwood Pass was purely a military town, but as time passed, because the barren mountains near Greenwood Pass produced all kinds of powerful demon beasts and spirit beasts, as well as all kinds of spirit herbs and rare ores, a large number of hunters and caravans gradually began to use Greenwood Pass as a distribution center. Today, Greenwood Pass had become the largest commercial center in this mountain range, and it was even more prosperous and lively than Zhongning City, the capital of Zhong Province. Wearing a black battle robe and a blood-red cloak, Wu Qi slowly walked into Greenwood Pass with his hands clasped behind his back. On both sides of the spacious road, there were countless shops, restaurants, brothels, and casinos. Although Diyu was conservative and traditional, it seemed that brothels and casinos existed everywhere, no matter how conservative the place was. Greenwood Plain was garrisoned with an army of 100,000 soldiers, and they were paid very well. As a result, there were a lot of brothels and other places of entertainment in Greenwood Pass. King Yang Qiu's army had been stationed here for 36 days, and Wu Qi had been busy refining Dark Yin Celestial Tower. This was the first time he had a chance to enjoy the scenery of Greenwood Pass. Even in the middle of the night, the place was still very lively, and filled with a savage aura of life. Loud screams of women and the deep panting of men could be heard coming out of the brothels along the road. In the casinos, the sound of all kinds of gambling devices was deafening, and countless people were shouting and yelling at the top of their lungs. In a few restaurants, drunken men were fighting each other, while countless people were clapping and stamping their feet to cheer them on. The doors of the shops were wide open, and a few dim lights could be seen flickering inside. Some burly men, who moved stealthily like ghosts, snuck into these shops and showed their harvests to the shopkeepers, hoping to sell them for a sky-high price that would allow them to live a carefree life for the rest of their lives. The shops in Greenwood Pass always had better business at night than during the day, because if you sold your goods at a high price during the day, you were likely to be robbed on the street within a few steps. But at night, it was much more hidden and safer. From time to time, suppressed laughter could be heard coming from these shops. Clearly, someone had found something very valuable in the wilderness, and the shops were offering a high price beyond their imagination. Although these shops were protected by various restrictive spells, Wu Qi's innate divine sense could enter and leave them at will. Smiling, Wu Qi glanced at the goods with his divine sense, then shook his head gently. There were a few good things, but Wu Qi was not interested in them. Wu Qi had already mastered the heavenly star divination technique he learned from Su Qin. Just now, on a whim, he sensed a strong killing intent coming at him, just like the omen he felt when someone tried to assassinate him with a bear-slaying arrow years ago. Those people are really persistent. It's been so long, and yet they're still following me. Over the past year or so, Wu Qi had been aware that someone was following him. But, as he was in the midst of the army, those people dared not to break into King Yang Qiu's camp, for they would be courting death. So, he had a whole year to refine all kinds of materials in peace. But now that the Dark Yin Celestial Tower had been successfully refined, Wu Qi was eager to let this treasure see some blood, and at the same time, he wanted to see who was so obsessed with him. Walking along the streets of Greenwood Pass, although the streets were bustling with people, people parted subconsciously wherever Wu Qi passed. No one dared to get within 30 feet of Wu Qi. The battle robe he was wearing showed his identity. Everyone in Greenwood Pass knew that one should never provoke the people of the Great Yu Army, or else one would be asking for trouble. There was an unspoken rule in Greenwood Pass: it was perfectly justified for the soldiers stationed in Greenwood Plain to kill people. There was a large empty space around him, making him stand out like a sore thumb on the street. Patriarch Yuan Hua and Lu Buwei were squinting at Wu Qi from a tall building on the side of the road. They breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Patriarch Yuan Hua shook his head and said with a sigh, "Finally, this boy is traveling alone. Otherwise, when would I be able to kill him? He, that is an immortal abode. No matter what, Patriarch of Immortal Mansion wants it." Lu Buwei nodded. He gave the surroundings a glance and said with a cold grin, "There are many people who have their eyes on this boy. Now that Myriad Immortal Alliance has been defeated, those itinerant cultivator clans are having a hard time. Every day, countless itinerant cultivators are dug out and killed. The temptation of a hidden immortal abode is too great. Master, if we want that immortal abode, we need to put in more effort. Patriarch Yuan Hua snorted disdainfully. A ferocious blood-red gleam shone in his eyes as he said in a low voice, "If that's the case, I'll just kill all these juniors. Over the past year, I've collected countless blood essences and souls. Hee, it's time for this natal magical treasure of mine to kill someone." A blood-red flag slowly rose from the top of Patriarch Yuan Hua's head. He controlled it so that it would not emit any light. Under the moonlight, the blood flag turned into a dark shadow, sticking close to the ground and flowing towards Wu Qi. It looked like a puddle of dirty blood was flowing quickly on the ground. Countless shouts rang out at the same time. On the hundreds of buildings around Wu Qi, at least 1,000 immortals and itinerant cultivators unleashed their flying swords and slashed them down toward Wu Qi's head. The density of the flying swords was so great that when over 1,000 flying swords collided with each other, several hundred of them exploded in midair. Curses of shock and anger could be heard coming from afar, while all kinds of magical treasures and thunderbolts came flying toward Wu Qi. "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him, and we'll have an absolutely safe immortal abode." The immortals and itinerant cultivators roared in unison. In just over a year, the situation on Panga continent had changed too fast. The living space of itinerant cultivators had been squeezed to the limit, and the attraction of an absolutely secret immortal abode in Gourd Immortal Market was more than 100 times greater than it was a year ago. With this immortal abode, they would have a chance to survive, and the chance to continue their clans or sects on Panga continent. Therefore, Wu Qi's attraction was even greater now. Not long after King Yang Qiu's army arrived in Greenwood Plain, more than 1,000 immortals and itinerant cultivators came here, hoping to kill Wu Qi with a single blow. More immortals and itinerant cultivators followed King Yang Qiu's army and came here. But, as the journey was too long, they could not make it in time. As countless magical treasures and thunderbolts came raining down on him, Wu Qi laughed wildly, and the Darkeen Celestial Tower, which he had just refined, flew out at top speed. The huge black tower hovered above Wu Qi's head, enveloping him in a cold aurora. Many magical treasures were smashing onto the light barrier formed by the cold aurora, but they were immediately frozen and shattered by the frightening cold, or sliced into pieces by the extremely sharp aurora. Cries of alarm rang out from afar, and those immortals and itinerant cultivators who were eager to strike spat out blood and backed away. Wu Qi snorted coldly and pointed a finger at the Darkeen Celestial Tower. A great wave of water sprayed out from the base of the tower, which transformed into hundreds of huge white dragons and flew toward those immortals and itinerant cultivators. Accompanied by screams of horror, the immortals and itinerant cultivators were pulled into the tower by the dragons. A shrill alarm rang out, and the garrison army of Greenwood Pass was dispatched. Dull footsteps could be heard coming from all directions. A sheet of blood-red light rushed out from the front of Wu Qi, and a blood-red flag came flying toward him with a pungent smell of blood. Chapter 7:12. A muffled thunderclap rang out, and the void within 100 miles around shattered. Lei Meng's huge projection squeezed out of the shattered void with great difficulty. Laughing merrily, he swooped down from the sky and grabbed the blood-red flag tightly in his hand. The flag emitted a blinding blood-red light, which transformed into countless blades, spears, swords, and halberds that flew toward Lei Meng's huge hand. However, countless bolts of lightning shot out of Lei Meng's hand like flood dragons, shattering all the weapons transformed from the blood-red light. But, as soon as the 9 nether ghost flames sprayed out, the blood-red flag was immediately set ablaze. In just a few seconds, all the restrictive spells on the flag were burned away by the black ghost flame. Accompanied by a shrill roar, the ghost flame rushed into the sea of blood. Immediately, the boundless sea of blood burst into a towering fire. The blood was quickly evaporated, and the vengeful souls in it were turned into smoke by the black, sticky flame. "Black, big girl, little girl, it's time for more food. Fresh meat, make yourself at home." These heavenly ghosts had sharp horns on their heads, their bodies were covered with sticky, smooth skin, and long tails trailing behind them. They flew over the sea of blood like a gust of wind, and from time to time, they would disappear and travel through the void, appearing wherever they wanted. Their bodies were wrapped in a thick layer of blood, and their bodies were between shadow and corporeal. They were not real heavenly ghosts, but blood-draining fiends that Patriarch Yuan Hua had refined with a fiend technique. A deafening boom rang out as the flag was blown to ashes by Lei Meng. Only a wisp of pale red spirit light was left hovering in Lei Meng's palm. It was a wisp of the original spirit of the flag, which contained all the information about it. Lei Meng generously threw the wisp of Yuan Ling into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean, then twisted his body and disappeared without a trace. The harvest this time was huge, and the amount of blood in the sea was very large. Lei Meng was in a hurry to go back and digest the blood essence and souls he had obtained this time. Hundreds of blood-draining fiends rushed madly at Wu Qi. But, Wu Qi had refined Dark Een Celestial Tower with the mystic technique used by the Directorate of Celestials to craft supreme towers, and the method used by immortals to craft gold immortal artifacts. As a result, the tower had the characteristics of both a supreme tower and an immortal artifact. The most common use of the Tower of Babel was to shatter the void and serve as a means of transportation for the high priests. Since he could shatter the void, he could naturally seal the void as well. But Wu Qi was protected by a thick layer of frigid aurora. As soon as those blood-draining demons touched the frigid aurora, they were instantly frozen and torn apart. Not a single one of them could touch Wu Qi's body. Those blood-draining fiends, who were rushing at Lei Meng, were even more miserable. Even when they were still far away from him, they were completely turned into wisps of smoke by the electric arcs. As the smell of blood wafted in his face, Wu Qi gave a cold snort and unleashed a plume of 9 nether ghost flame, which was as dark as ink, to quickly ignite the blood flag. The blood flag was sticky and filthy, and there was a vague image of a sea of blood roiling in it. Countless vengeful souls were tossing and turning in the sea of blood, their shrill howls shaking one's soul. There was an evil force hidden in the howls that could pull one's soul out and crush it, constantly attacking Wu Qi's divine soul. Wu Qi strode to the tall building where Lu Buwei was standing just now and sneered gloomily. The Dark Een Celestial Tower was spraying out a great sheet of frigid aurora, freezing the void above Greenwood Pass. Those blood-draining fiends were frantically exercising their innate divine abilities, trying to break through the void and get to Wu Qi's side. But, they could not shake the reinforced space at all. All they could do was charge at Wu Qi with the escape art, spread their sharp claws and teeth, and tear at Wu Qi, tearing his body to pieces and shattering his soul, so that he would never be able to reincarnate. As the Blood Sea Grand Magic had yet to be completed, he had only refined several hundred blood-draining fiends. However, these fiends could come and go without a trace, and they could travel through the void and hide themselves at will. On top of that, they were extremely strong, ferocious, and born with all kinds of innate divine abilities. As Patriarch Yuan Hua let out a furious roar, hundreds of blood-draining fiends flew out of the sea of blood. Hundreds of beams of blood-red light wheeled rapidly over Greenwood Pass for a while, then sped toward Lei Meng and Wu Qi. Lu Buwei gave an angry glare at Wu Qi, who was striding toward him, then heaved a long sigh and transformed into a wisp of smoke, vanishing without a trace. Lei Meng was laughing as he frantically devoured the blood essence and souls in the blood flag. Before long, he had completely devoured the entire sea of blood. Holding the blood flag with both hands, he tried his best to pour a massive force of thunder into it. Blood essence and souls were the nourishment needed by ghosts and deities from outer heavenly realms like Lei Meng. Even though he had been turned into a sea of blood and souls by Patriarch Yuan Hua with a vicious magic, Lei Meng was still able to absorb them. As long as they were blood and souls, his stomach could digest them and turn them into his own power. Cries of joy kept coming out of Lei Meng's mouth. As a huge amount of blood and souls continued to pour into his palms, his projection gradually became clearer. The 9 nether ghost flame was a vicious mystic technique created by those supreme oracles from De Yu's Directorate of Celestials, especially for geniuses who cultivated both fleshly body and magic. In terms of nature, if the 9 nether ghost flame was dirty water, then the sea of blood in the blood flag was a clear spring. The 9 nether ghost flame was too evil, too filthy, and too vicious. It was one of the trump cards of the dragon kill. Compared to it, Patriarch Yuan Hua's blood sea grand magic seemed to be more honorable and dignified. Die, evil spawn. Patriarch Yuan Hua's body was trembling violently. His instinct told him to leave this place as soon as possible, to get as far away from Wu Qi as possible. But, the part of Lord Blood Ocean's soul in his immortal soul kept telling him that he had to take back the blood flag from Lei Meng. The blood flag was Lord Blood Ocean's opportunity to prove his Tao. With it, he would have a boundless future waiting for him. Without it, he would never be able to glimpse the great Tao. He pointed a finger at the blood flag. The sea of blood in the flag immediately began to roll violently, and a huge invisible vortex slowly emerged from within. Eerie ghost howls could be heard coming out of the vortex. Accompanied by the splashing of water, countless heavenly ghosts, each about 100 feet tall, leaped out of the vortex. With Darkeen's celestial tower hovering over his head, Wu Qi pretended not to see the hundreds of blood-draining fiends. He flew up into the sky, his hands rapidly changing incantation gestures as he murmured various incantations. Strange energy ripples spread out from his fingertips, and in the blink of an eye, over 1,000 tiny needles of light shot out of his fingertips, shooting toward the immortals and itinerant cultivators who were swarming toward him with ear-piercing ghost howls. All the immortals and itinerant cultivators who came to assassinate Wu Qi had been killed by Wu Qi. Only Patriarch Yuan Hua and Lu Buwei were left standing in the distant skyscraper, glaring at Wu Qi as if they had just seen a ghost. Nearly 1,000 immortals and itinerant cultivators were killed by Wu Qi in just a few moves. It was a pity that Immortal Gourd of Gourd Immortal Market had given these immortals and itinerant cultivators wrong information. According to it, Wu Qi's cultivation base was only a heaven immortal. But, with the blessing of the heavenly Tao, Wu Qi's cultivation base had reached the realm of a 5th-tier gold immortal. Whether it was his fleshly body or his magic power, both had reached a very high level among immortals. Now, he had the terrible power to destroy a heavenly realm with every move he made. In front of him, heaven immortals were like babies standing in front of a giant. They could not withstand a single blow, let alone those itinerant cultivators who came with him to take advantage of him. Wu Qi laughed in a low voice. Ao Buzan poked half of his body out of his left ear, while the 2 dragon pythons poked half of their bodies out of his right ear. Abruptly, 3 huge mouths appeared around Wu Qi, swallowing all the itinerant immortals and itinerant cultivators, the strongest of whom was only a 27th-tier heaven immortal. A terrible crunching noise rang out, and the hundreds of immortals and itinerant cultivators had turned into a plate of snacks for them. Amidst a long, shrill cry, Wu Qi's body quickly grew to 50 feet tall. With his claws covered in dragon scales, he grabbed the blood flag, which had turned into a wave of blood and was trying to flee. Lei Meng, come out now and take your food, he cried out. This is your reward for helping me kill the sovereign that day. Standing next to Lu Buwei, Patriarch Yuan Hua's blood and energy were rocking violently. Having fused his nascent divinity with the blood flag, he coughed up a large amount of dirty blood at the same time, and there was a faint black flame burning all over his body. Lu Buwei was so frightened that he took a few steps back, staring at Patriarch Yuan Hua in horror. He could not understand why the old man had suddenly become like this. Lu Buwei stealthily took a few steps back, staring at Wu Qi in horror, and cursing Immortal Gourd's mother in a low voice. Patriarch Yuan Hua howled in exasperation. The 9 nether ghost flame was burning his body, and his limbs were constantly being corroded and devoured by the ghost flame. Lei Meng had extracted the sea of blood from his blood flag, which had caused his overall strength to plummet. In just the space of a few breaths, his cultivation base had dropped by 3 tiers. With Patriarch Yuan Hua's current overall strength, how could he withstand such a torment from Lei Meng? In desperation, Patriarch Yuan Hua did not hesitate to strike out the strongest attack he had cultivated with the help of Lu Buwei's heavenly ghost grand magic, which he had spent more than a year together with Lu Buwei. Light needles composed of complicated runes and spells tore through the void with long, thin halos, piercing accurately into the forehead of every attacking immortal and itinerant cultivator. Their immortal souls were instantly frozen, and so were the nascent divinities of the itinerant cultivators. Wu Qi waved his huge palm, and the Qi immortals were sucked toward Wu Qi while howling in pain. Their flying swords and magical treasures were drifting around them, but they had lost the power to control them. The blood flag shattered, and Patriarch Yuanhua howled miserably as his body transformed into a wisp of smoke and vanished. A few gold immortal items flew out of his body, transforming into beams of light that shot up into the sky and fled. Hundreds of blood-draining fiends were flying across the sea of blood, letting out shrill cries and launching crazy attacks at their own kind from time to time. These blood-draining fiends were summoned by Lu Buwei from Ghost Domain, and then refined by Patriarch Yuanhua with the blood essence of billions of living beings using a fiend technique. After gathering tens of thousands of blood-draining fiends, he let them fight and devour each other like poisonous bugs. The last 18 blood-draining fiends were the blood-draining fiends that Patriarch Yuanhua was going to cultivate with his life. Lei Meng was desperately plundering the blood essence and souls in the sea of blood, completely ignoring the hundreds of ferocious blood-draining fiends. The lightning around him grew denser and denser as countless bolts of lightning swirled around him, transforming into a thick armor that wrapped him up. Any external attack that wanted to touch him would have to penetrate the lightning armor that was about a mile thick. What a treasure! What a treasure! It is at least an innate chaotic treasure. What a pity that it has been destroyed like this. Alas, the fragments that are left here are not even 1% of its original form. Lei Meng grabbed the blood flag with one hand. With his vast intelligence, he immediately sensed some obscure information hidden in it. He could not help but sigh with emotion. A huge vortex of lightning formed in his palm, and it began to frantically devour the blood and souls in the flag. Chapter 713. During the night raid in Greenwood Pass, Wu Qi killed 795 Heaven Immortals and itinerant cultivators and captured 35 Heaven Immortals and 452 itinerant cultivators. Apart from Lu Buwei, who escaped with the help of the Heavenly Ghost Grand Magic, none of the attackers were spared. Apart from Ao Buzan and the 2 dragon pythons, Wu Qi's greatest harvest was the wisp of Yuanling's essence that Lei Meng had separated from the blood flag. The Blood Sea Grand Magic, a vicious and ferocious cultivation technique of the Fiend League, had been completely separated from the blood flag by Lei Meng with a mighty divine ability, and Wu Qi had obtained the complete cultivation technique of Blood Sea Grand Magic. After spending a whole night studying the Blood Sea Grand Magic, Wu Qi learned the reason why Patriarch Yuanhua had hooked up with Lu Buwei. The most powerful cultivation technique of Blood Sea Grand Magic was the 18 blood-draining celestial fiends, and the best materials to refine them were the powerful heavenly ghosts from the various ghost domains. After carefully studying the various vicious and ferocious mystic techniques and divine abilities recorded in the Blood Sea Grand Magic, Wu Qi was delighted to find that they could all be fused with the Dragon Kill, which would greatly enhance his overall strength. Even Wu Qi had the intention to cultivate the Blood Sea Grand Magic. Of course, he would not slaughter living beings to refine the Blood Sea Grand Magic like Patriarch Yuanhua did. He had his own ways to obtain the endless blood essence and souls needed for the Blood Sea Grand Magic. In the Scroll of Stealing, there was a mystic technique that could open the Yellow Spring and communicate with the Nether Blood Sea, from which he could obtain an endless supply of blood. As those fiend immortals were used to using human souls to refine all kinds of vicious fiend artifacts, Wu Qi only needed to kill them and seize their fiend artifacts. As for refining the 18 blood-draining celestial fiends, what materials could be cheaper than all 18 celestial fiend puppets that Wu Qi had now? Over the years, these 18 celestial fiend puppets had consumed countless precious ores and materials from Wu Qi, and their bodies had been strengthened to a level that even Wu Qi was shocked. If he used the Blood Sea Grand Magic to fuse them with endless blood essence and souls, then added a wisp of his own nascent divinity and refined them into blood-draining celestial fiends with his natal true flame, he would possess a power 100 times greater than the heavenly ghosts summoned by Lu Buwei. As of now, the celestial fiend puppets were still tangible objects, and although they were invincible in a face-to-face fight, they were not strong enough to carry out some secret activities. When Wu Qi refined them into blood-draining devil gods, they would transform from tangible objects into intangible and intangible devil gods. When they dispersed, they would become chi, and when they gathered, they would become devils. When they dispersed, they would be invisible, traceless, and silent. Naturally, their power would be stronger than now. This was what Wu Qi had gained in the night raid. But, his problem was that King Yang Qiu, who had regarded Wu Qi as his future chief thug, had forbidden Wu Qi from leaving the cloud platform. King Yang Qiu's reasoning was that the attackers this time were a group of immortals and itinerant cultivators with low cultivation bases. If the next attackers were gold immortals from Myriad Immortal Alliance, or even stronger existences, Wu Qi's life would be in danger. Before Wu Qi had the strength to protect himself, King Yang Qiu strictly forbade Wu Qi from leaving the cloud platform, and the defense of the army had been strengthened tenfold. Yu Gu, who had been talking about marrying one of his daughters, granddaughters, or great-granddaughters to Wu Qi, had been following Wu Qi closely. Yu Gu had also seen the potential Wu Qi had and the prospect of his future development, so he accompanied Wu Qi day and night very attentively, and the only thing he lacked was to sleep with Wu Qi. Amidst this meticulous protection, after King Yang Qiu's army had been stationed in Greenwood Plain for 36 days, at King Yang Qiu's order, the army broke camp and set off for Liangzhou on flying ships at the fastest speed. Nearly 1,000 flying ships formed a huge circular formation and hovered in midair. Together with Yu Gu's Supreme Tower, a total of 4 Supreme Towers formed a tetrahedron that wrapped around the formation. The 4 Supreme Towers shattered the void at the same time, bringing nearly 1,000 flying ships and hundreds of thousands of soldiers under King Yang Qiu's command to Liangzhou at the fastest speed possible. With the help of Yu Gu and the 3 Supreme Oracles sent by Liangzhou's Directorate of Celestials, it took only 3 days for Wu Qi and the others to arrive at Yuxiong Plain from Greenwood Plain. Yuxiong Plain was the birthplace of Yuxiong clan, and the place where Xianyuan, the Yellow Emperor of the 5 great emperors of Pangu continent, rose to power. In the past, when the human race was born, many tribes lived and multiplied on Pangu continent. It was Xianyuan, the Yellow Emperor, who led the Yuxiong clan to Yuxiong Plain and spent 1,000 years to unite all the tribes into a complete tribal alliance. With the combined strength of all the tribes, the human race finally had the power to fight against the ancient gods and all the demons and fiends. Because of this achievement, Xianyuan was bestowed with immeasurable virtues, and was honored as the sacred emperor by the human race. With the immeasurable virtues, Xianyuan was able to survive from the ancient times to the present. Together with Shenong, the Yan Emperor, he was ranked among the 5 great emperors of Pangu continent, and became the supreme protector of the human race. Because of Xuanyuan's virtues, Yuxiong Plain had become the most fertile land on Pangu continent, a blessed land with the richest natural energy. It was said that there were no energy veins in Yuxiong Plain, because underneath it was a huge spirit cave that Wu Qi had never heard of, seen, or even thought of. It was said that this spirit cave was derived from the heart of Pangu, the great saint, and was the largest spirit cave on Pangu continent. The hundreds of millions of giant energy veins that stretched out from it were the source of all the energy veins on Pangu continent. When the Supreme Tower broke through the void and appeared over Yuxiong Plain, Wu Qi, who was standing on the cloud platform, was shocked. He peeped into Yuxiong Plain with his chaotic divine eyes, and as far as his eyes could see, he saw a vast expanse of energy and purple mist. Underneath Yuxiong Plain was a huge spirit cave that shocked Wu Qi so much that his mind went blank. It was not clouds that drifted over Yuxiong Plain, but white clouds composed of natural energy and purple mist. Half of the raindrops that fell here were pure spirit liquid particles. Compared with the natural energy in Yuxiong Plain, all the blessed lands and immortal abodes in the outside world were nothing. Mount Picking Star, where Wu Qi had built his cave abode with 18 immortal veins, was also a blessed land with an extremely rich immortal energy. But, the natural energy in any random pit in Yuxiong Plain was 1,000 times more than that in Wu Qi's cave abode. Spirit items that were rare and precious in the outside world could be found almost everywhere here. To be precise, the stones used by the common people to build their houses were supreme-grade immortal stones, and the materials they used to forge hoes and plows were ores that could be used to forge supreme-grade gold immortal artifacts in outer heavenly realms. At last, Wu Qi understood why the human emperor had forbidden immortals to come close to the land 10 billion miles around Yuxiong Plain. As long as any immortal dared to come close to Yuxiong Plain, the Deyu dynasty would do everything in its power to wipe them out. They had to be killed. Any immortal who was so poor that he did not even have a pair of pants to wear, as long as he sneaked into Yuxiong Plain, took some dirt and broken wood, and ran out, he would become a rich immortal among the immortals. While immortals in outer heavenly realms were fighting for energy stones or immortal stones, if an immortal could secretly cultivate in Yuxiong Plain for 1,000 years, he would be able to achieve a cultivation base that could not be achieved in the outside world for several eons. Therefore, except for the angels sent by the celestial court to Deyu dynasty, if any other immortal dared to come close to Yuxiong Plain, they would be killed with all their might, and their entire clan would be killed without any reason. They must not be allowed to bring the terrifying resources of Yuxiong Plain to the outside world so that the immortals could develop and grow stronger. The cultivation resources contained in any of the mountains here were enough to turn a small itinerant cultivator clan into a cultivation sect that was 100 times stronger than Green City in just 10,000 years. If the human emperor had not issued such a ban, Yuxiong Plain would have been dug 3,000 miles into the ground by the immortals, and not even a blade of grass could be found. What shocked Wu Qi was that as he moved from the edge of Yuxiong Plain to Liangzhu, the concentration of natural energy became higher the closer he got to the heart of Yuxiong Plain, and the ratio of the increase was exponentially higher. When King Yangqiu's army came to a place less than 100 miles from Liangzhu, the concentration of natural energy here made Wu Qi shake his head repeatedly. Apart from that, he could not think of anything else. Liangzhu was the capital city of Deyu dynasty, a city that had existed since the ancient times. Unlike the capital cities of Deyu dynasty, Liangzhu was a city with a more agricultural atmosphere. The main city of Liangzhu was just a rough-looking city made of earth, built along a river that was about 100 miles wide. The city wall measured about 300 miles from east to west, and 180 miles from north to south. The shape of the city wall was irregular, and the highest part of the wall was only about 10 feet high. It was not as dignified and majestic as the capital cities of Deyu dynasty. Inside Liangzhu, the city was full of old, conservative palaces made of black stone that seemed to be covered with moss. Outside the city, along the river and the mountains, it was as if someone had picked up a handful of stones and thrown them into the sky. Farmland and villages were scattered all over the place, and they seemed to be in disrepair. Dirt roads, which were less than 20 feet wide at the widest part, connected Liangzhu with the countless villages and towns outside the city. In the vast Liangzhu city, no particularly tall or splendid buildings could be seen. All buildings seemed to be made from the same mold. The only difference was the size of the buildings. All the buildings gave off an extremely ancient and decrepit aura. From a distance, Liangzhu looked like an old man who had one foot in the grave, lying lazily by the river and dozing off. But when Wu Qi carefully savored the aura of Liangzhu, he found that under the lazy appearance, there was a ferocious aura that made Wu Qi's hair stand on end. It was as if this city could turn from an old man who was dying into a giant beast that could destroy everything at any time. Every ancient mark on every building in the city was giving off this unique ferocious aura. This was Liangzhu, the ruling core of Deyu dynasty, a place where even a primordial immortal would be torn into pieces in an instant if he invaded. This was Liangzhu, the capital city of Deyu dynasty that was fighting against the division court of the celestial court. This was a magical city where countless myths and legends were hidden, and even more had drifted away with the wind and rain. This was Liangzhu, the place where Wu Qi had finally arrived after spending a great deal of effort and energy and going through many trials and tribulations. A long, drawn-out sound of a horn could be heard coming from Liangzhu. A troop of people rose into the sky from the city and approached Wu Qi. Chapter 7:14. A large group of people came out of Liangzhu to greet them. Rare birds and strange beasts were flying all over the sky, and 12 golden-tusked mammoths, each with 2 pairs of tusks protruding from their backs. These golden-tusked mammoths were also an extraordinary species of the primitive universe. They were born with intelligence and incredible strength, and were the strongest among all the divine beasts. Even the most famous divine beasts, the azure dragon and the white tiger, could not defeat them in strength. In outer heavenly realms, these golden-tusked mammoths were extinct, but in Diyu, they were part of the guard of honor. Behind each mammoth, which was around 100 meters tall, was a throne carved out of black stone. On the throne sat an old man, who was wearing a black, coarse linen robe and had his hair coiled into a bun with a thorny hairpin, and had an ancient face. Looking at these old men, Wuqi felt that they looked exactly the same, about the same height, the same skin color, the same appearance, and even the same temperament and aura emanating from them. They looked stiff, cold and numb on the outside, but inside of them was a terrible power that could destroy everything. The power of these 12 old men was dark and profound, restrained like a black hole. There was no energy fluctuation around them, but anyone who saw them would instinctively sense danger. Compared with these old men, Yugu looked as harmless as a rabbit. Was this the power of Diyu? Standing next to King Yangqiu, Wuqi bowed deeply together with him, then clenched his right fist and knocked on his chest, producing a crisp, metallic clang. Nearly 1,000 generals, more than 10,000 military officers, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers bowed at the same time. When their fists collided with their breastplates, a deafening boom rang out, as if a thunderclap had struck the ground. Diyu's official position was extremely strange and unique. In addition to the administrative departments directly under the human emperor, such as the military court and the Directorate of Celestials, there was also an organization similar to the Council of Elders of the Tribal Alliance. The Elder Council of the Tribal Alliance was headed by the elders of Yuxiong clan, and there were also elders from other clans that had existed since the ancient times, such as Gaochen clan and Yuqiong clan. They had the power to supervise the government of Great Yu, and even impeach and dismiss the human emperor. These 12 old men were the 12 great elders of the Council of Elders, and their status in Diyu was very high. Although they had no real administrative power in the court, their status was much higher than that of King Yangqiu's father, King Yangshan. They were the kind of troublemakers that could be seen from afar, and if they offended them, they would be condemned by the people of Diyu. In Great Yu, those who offended the human emperor might only be exiled to the primitive land, but if they offended the great elders of the alliance of 12 tribes, it was very likely that the next day, countless formidable warriors and oracles from some tribe would flatten the unlucky man's clan, killing all his family members, and even setting the land on fire before they left, making it barren for hundreds of years to come. This was a group of people who were above the law, above all rules. The fact that they were able to send such existences out of the city to greet King Yangqiu showed how much the people of Diyu reacted to King Yangqiu's contribution. As Wuqi listened to Yugu's secret explanation of the identities of these old men through voice transmission, he could not help but feel wild with joy. Since all 12 great elders had come out of the city to greet King Yangqiu at the same time, it was obvious that Diyu attached great importance to King Yangqiu's contribution. Did that not mean that they would be rewarded handsomely? Behind the 12 golden-tusked mammoths came 108 black dragons, followed by 108 white dragons, 108 red dragons, 108 yellow dragons, and 108 green dragons. These flood dragons all had 4 claws and were shrouded in clouds. Clearly, they were all heaven dragons with profound cultivation bases. On the back of each dragon rode a heavily armored knight, each holding a specially made spear that was 60 feet long, and their bodies were shrouded in a purple mist that was invisible to the naked eye. The threatening aura they emanated made Wuqi feel as if there was a mountain pressing down on his heart. Ao Buzan lamented in Wuqi's ear, "When did these dragons end up like this? They used to be royalty of the ancient times, and now they are here as mounts for others. I should have killed all of them when I killed their mothers, so that they wouldn't make a fool of themselves by giving birth to these disappointing descendants. I don't think any of your descendants are here, do I?" Wuqi secretly sent a voice transmission to Ao Buzan with his divine sense. Ao Buzan sighed softly and murmured in a low voice, "Maybe not for the other 4, but among the black dragons." Lao Tzu, the most famous beauty of the black dragons, didn't let go of a single one of them. Alas, if I count the time, there might be a descendant of Lao Tzu among them now. Wuqi was speechless. He shut off the hearing in his left ear, too lazy to listen to Ao Buzan's self-pity. Behind the 5 squads of dragon riders came groups of knights riding on phoenixes, green wands, peacocks, cheilants, white tigers, black tortoises, and other divine beasts. These knights were all warriors with extremely strong cultivation bases, and the aura emanating from them was not weaker than that of the young Qiu brothers. All of them were experts of the gold immortal realm. Wu Qi's heart was racing. De Yu's hidden forces were too strong. Just a guard of honor alone had tens of thousands of experts whose cultivation bases were above the second Panga heaven. But it was not surprising. The natural energy and Panga's sacred energy in Yuxiong Plain were so abundant that one day of cultivation here was equivalent to several years of cultivation outside the plain. On top of that, there were countless spirit herbs here. If De Yu did not have such a strong foundation, he would be letting down this abnormal blessed land of Yuxiong Plain. The divine beasts galloped, leaving behind countless beams of auspicious light as they circled 9 times around King Yangqiu's army. Casting their divine abilities, these divine beasts sprayed out plumes of auspicious light like fireworks, enveloping King Yangqiu's army in a strong glow. Riding on golden-tusked mammoths, the 12 great elders came slowly in front of Wu Qi and others. An old man in the middle glanced at Wu Qi and others with his slightly cloudy eyes, then focused on King Yangqiu and squeezed out an expression that could barely be considered a smile on his face. King Yangqiu has made a great contribution by eradicating a malignant tumor for De Yu. By the order of the human emperor, we have come to welcome you. Please bring the meritorious generals to Liangzhu with you to receive the conferment. The rest of you can camp outside the city, and we will send you rewards. The old man nodded slowly and said, the whole imperial court is very happy with the destruction of Myriad Immortal Alliance, and all the rewards are 10 times the usual. King Yangqiu bowed deeply again and cried out in a deep voice, we are grateful for your majesty's grace. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers roared at the top of their lungs at the same time, chanting slogans like, Your Majesty, and, Long live your Majesty. The deafening sound waves pushed the clouds away in all directions, revealing a vast expanse of blue sky. Leaving the army outside the city, Wu Qi followed King Yangqiu and nearly 1,000 generals into Liangzhu, escorted and welcomed by the guard of honor on both sides of the street. Outside the city, the guard of honor had made such a grand scene, but when they entered Liangzhu, the streets were deserted. It was not the scene that Wu Qi had imagined, where tens of thousands of people came out of the streets to feast on the jug. Glancing around at the clean and spacious streets, Wu Qi could not help but twitch his lips. It seemed that the people of De Yu had some problems with their awareness. It was not until some time later that Wu Qi learned that the people living in Liangzhu were all high-ranking officials and ministers of De Yu, and those with a title lower than Marquis were too embarrassed to live in the city. King Yangqiu had returned with great honors, and all the high-ranking officials and nobles in the city had gone to the imperial palace to attend the conferring ceremony. So, how could their servants and maids dare to come out and watch the fun? After walking along the clean and spacious streets for more than 100 miles, a vast garden came into sight. Countless towering ancient trees clustered around thousands of palaces of various sizes. Even though he was still far away from these palaces, he could already sense the faint spatial ripples coming from the void. Stealthily glancing at the palaces with his chaotic divine eyes, Wu Qi could not help but lick his lips. The spatial restrictive spell here had reached the peak of perfection. If one looked at any of the thousands of palaces, they would be huge palaces that occupied a vast area, some of them measuring several miles in both length and width. But, if one looked at it from the outside, the thousands of palaces were all squeezed into this garden, which was only about 10 miles in both width and length. But, at first glance, one would not feel crowded or embarrassed. On the contrary, the space around these palaces was extremely spacious. When Wu Qi saw through the layer of spatial restrictive spell with his chaotic divine eyes, he found that the garden was about 1,000 miles in both length and width, and there were mountains, rivers, sun, moon, and stars in it. It was like a small world of its own. But, the sun, moon, and stars in the sky above the garden were echoing with the celestial bodies in the outside world, as if they were projections of the sun, moon, and stars in the outside world. It was a very exquisite spatial restrictive spell, and its mysteriousness was not inferior to the Buddhist kingdom in the palm of the Buddhist League or the interstitial world of the Taoist League. Escorted by the guards of honor and guided by the 12 great elders, Wu Qi and his company walked slowly into the garden from between two giant statues that stood about 10,000 feet tall. The two statues were carved entirely from a single piece of black stone. They were the images of two warriors leaping into the air with a python hanging around their necks and a long sword and spear in their hands. The swords and spears held by the two statues were joined together like an arched door. It was between the two statues that Wu Qi and his company walked. As they passed by the two statues, Wu Qi sensed an obscure energy fluctuation. These two statues were two formidable stone puppets, just like the huge puppets that Feng Lengleng used to attack Zhongning City. But, these two puppets here were taller, and they should be stronger. After passing through a thick layer of spatial restrictive spell, Wu Qi's eyes lit up, and a beautiful landscape appeared before Wu Qi's eyes. The scenery here was 100 times better than that of Yuxiong Plain. It was as if the water here was crystal clear, the trees were crisp, the air was fresh, and the flowers and plants were blooming. The scenery here was so beautiful that it gave Wu Qi the illusion that he was in a dream. Thousands of large and small palaces built from giant rocks stood between the mountains and rivers. In front of each palace, there was a row of giant stone pillars. Green pillars of fire rose into the sky from the braziers on the pillars, covering the mountains and rivers with a layer of cold and gloomy green light. Between the bright and beautiful mountains and rivers, there was a hidden aura that made people feel uneasy. There seemed to be some life-threatening danger under every plant. Walking in this landscape, Wu Qi, who had a powerful divine sense and keen perception, felt as if someone was pressing against his body with a weapon, making him feel very uncomfortable. This was the imperial palace of Deyu, the residence of the human emperor, Deyu. Chapter 7:15. The guards of honor gradually dispersed, and in the end, only 12 great elders and 3,000 guards remained, escorting Wu Qi and his company along the main road. Deyu's imperial palace occupied a vast area. Apart from the main road in the middle, the rest of the palace was filled with barren mountains and rivers, and there was not even a path between the trees and flowers. It seemed that those who came and went from the palace had to fly in the air. The scenery along the way was wild and unsophisticated. Phoenixes had built their nests on huge trees that towered tens of thousands of feet high, and flood dragons were lurking in deep ponds along the road. Occasionally, groups of feathermen warriors would glide across the sky in groups of 3 to 5, their eyes fierce. Rare animals would come out of the bushes along the road, roaring at Wu Qi and his company without fear, then plunging back into the bushes and leaving. Occasionally, strange-looking guards could be seen stationed on the peaks along the road. Some of them were short and skinny like dwarves, but they had a pair of fist-sized eyes. Standing on the mountains, they glanced around, their eyes gleaming with a golden light that could reach tens of thousands of miles away. Everything within 10,000 miles was captured in their eyes. There were also some who were as tall as bamboo poles and extremely skinny. Their faces were like dates, but they had a pair of huge elephant-like ears. They were listening to the surroundings, and nothing within tens of thousands of miles could escape their ears. Wu Qi's pupils constricted as he gave them a quick glance. Those who had a pair of big eyes were considered a rare species on Panga continent. They were called the Heaven Eye tribe. They were born weak and had little fighting strength, but they were born with an extraordinary eyesight. Ordinary members of their tribe could see everything within 10,000 miles, and if their cultivation base reached a certain level, they could peer into the 9 heavens and the yellow spring. Ordinary escape arts and invisibility arts were just a joke in front of them. Those who had a pair of big ears belonged to the Divine Ear tribe. Like the Heaven Eye tribe, they were an extremely rare species. With just a shake of their ears, ordinary members of their tribe could hear the sound of a needle falling into water from tens of thousands of miles away, and those who had a certain level of cultivation base could even eavesdrop on the sounds of immortals lecturing in the 9 heavens, and the miserable howls of evil ghosts being punished in the 9 underworlds. When ordinary immortals used escape arts to pass through the ground, not even the slightest sound of friction could escape their ears. The Heaven Eye tribe and the God Ear tribe had people who had sought refuge with the celestial court. The Qianli Yen and the Clairaudient tribe, who had been patrolling the heaven palace of the celestial court, were their people. Whether it was in the celestial court or in Diyu, these two tribes were strictly protected. In Diyu, even a prince had no right to punish the people of these two tribes. Wu Qi nodded to himself. Along the way, there were at least thousands of people from these two clans patrolling the surroundings. This was the atmosphere that the Diyu palace should have. It was much more imposing than the two clairvoyant and clairaudient squatting in front of the celestial court. But it made sense. The headquarters of these two tribes were still in Diyu, on Panga continent. As for those who had sought refuge with the celestial court, they were only a very small branch clan. Since their population was not large, the celestial court could not put on a show like the imperial palace of Diyu Palace. As they walked deeper into the palace, a strange-shaped mountain appeared in front of them, and the road under their feet led straight to the foot of the mountain. From a distance, the mountain looked like a huge dragon coiling on the ground. It was covered with craggy rocks, and a huge, square palace with a strange-shaped tower at its four corners was sitting on the head of the mountain like a monster. The sun and the moon shone together in the sky, and the light of the sun, moon, and stars turned into a vast expanse of silver light, mixed with a strong purple mist, and fell from the sky, all of which were sucked into the palace. As he gave the mountain a closer look, Wu Qi kept feeling that there was something wrong with it. The mountain was 1,000 miles tall, and there was not a single blade of grass or tree on it. Its base was about 10,000 miles in diameter, and it was coiled up in circles, giving one the feeling that it was alive. As if he could see the doubt in Wu Qi's mind, Yu Gu gently patted Wu Qi on the shoulder and said in a low voice, "This is the Yu Xiong Palace of Diyu Dynasty, the main palace where Diyu Dynasty discusses the important affairs of the dynasty. As for the thing under the palace, it is an ancient torch dragon." Wu Qi stared at Yu Gu in astonishment. Was this thing that coiled up like a mountain, densely covered with countless rocks, an ancient torch dragon? Legend had it that the torch dragon was one of the ancient deities. His left eye was the sun, and his right eye was the moon. When he opened his eyes, the heaven and earth were illuminated, and when he closed his eyes, the sky was plunged into darkness. When he breathed, it was like the wind, and when he breathed, it was like thunder. He was the most famous deity in the ancient times. So, the thing holding up the huge palace under the Yu Xiong Palace of Diyu Dynasty was an ancient torch dragon? A thick layer of rocks covered the body of the torch dragon, making it impossible to see what he looked like. According to Yu Gu, this torch dragon had been coiled up here ever since Diyu Dynasty was founded and Yu Xiong Palace was built, and had not moved for countless eons. He was still alive, and his body would wriggle occasionally. But, for so many years, he had never communicated with the outside world. His body was gradually covered with dust, and then tempered by the power of the sun, the moon, and the stars, it gradually turned into a thick layer of rocks. No one knew why this torch dragon was willing to hold up Yu Xiong Palace, and no one knew how strong he was now. But, Yu Xiong Palace could be said to be the core of Liangzhu and the entire Yu Xiong Plain, the place with the highest concentration of natural energy, the essence of the sun and the moon, and Panga's sacred energy in the whole Panga continent. Apart from the human emperor of Diyu Dynasty, who was qualified to cultivate in seclusion in Yu Xiong Palace, only this torch dragon could enjoy the benefits of the endless natural energy here. The human emperor of Diyu Dynasty had changed countless generations, but this torch dragon had always been alive. Based on this alone, one could imagine the overall strength this torch dragon possessed today. He might be the last and strongest defense of the entire imperial palace of Diyu Dynasty. Following the torch dragon's coiled body, the skilled craftsmen of Diyu Dynasty had carved out a spiral-shaped mountain road. Step by step, the group of people walked up the mountain. There were many strange restrictive spells on the mountain road, which allowed Wu Qi and his companions to travel tens of miles with every step they took. So, Although the mountain was 1,000 miles high and the winding road was over 100,000 miles long, it took Wu Qi and his companions less than the time to finish a pot of tea to reach the top. In contrast, the restrictive spells on the mountain road would be a nightmare for invading enemies. If one did not know the origin of the restrictive spells, the hundreds of thousands of miles long mountain road would become extremely long when an intruder invaded Yuxiong Palace. Even a primordial immortal would have to spend years or even countless years to walk from the foot of the mountain to the top. Yuxiong Palace was an extremely ancient palace, and its style was extremely ancient. Tempered by the natural energy of heaven and earth, as well as the essence of the sun and the moon, the moss here had shown signs of turning into spirits. But, how could the oracles of Deyu dynasty tolerate the existence of these demons? The moss here had long been erased of their spirituality. Although the energy contained in each of them was comparable to that of the liquid of Ganoderma immortal Wu Qi had obtained in those years, they would never have the hope of transforming into human form. In front of the palace was a huge square that measured hundreds of miles in circumference. Numerous totem pillars carved with countless talismans and the heads of ghosts and deities could be seen towering in the square. Every stone pillar corresponded to the stars, forming a huge formation of stars. These totem pillars had been standing here for countless years. Their true forms should be huge stones randomly cut out from the mountains, but now that they had absorbed the natural energy of heaven and earth, as well as the essence of the sun and the moon, they had transformed from ordinary stones into gems that were countless times more lustrous and translucent than supreme-grade jade. Every part of them was filled with an enormous power. The energy ripples emanating from these totem pillars shocked Wu Qi, making his heart twitch and making his face turn unsightly. Was this the power of Deyu dynasty? The energy stored in each of these totem pillars was 10,000 times stronger than all the immortal energy in the body of a peak-level gold immortal. What did this mean? It meant that once the formation was activated, just the enormous energy contained in these totem pillars alone was enough to turn a primordial immortal into ashes in a flash. This was the power of Deyu dynasty, the power of a powerful race that had lasted from the primordial times to the present. In particular, Wu Qi sensed that near these totem pillars, the energies of earth, water, fire, and wind were all being annihilated into chaos, and then, through a complicated transformation, they turned into a brand new power that even Wu Qi could not distinguish. This proved that these totem pillars possessed the power to destroy the laws of heaven in a small area, and destroying the laws was the publicly acknowledged sign of becoming a primordial immortal. There were a total of 36,000 such totem pillars on the square, which measured hundreds of miles in circumference. Wu Qi quickly calculated the positions of these pillars and the stars they corresponded to in his mind, then combined them into dozens of very powerful formations in his mind. Then, he added them to the power contained in these totem pillars. Suddenly, cold sweat broke out from his back. What a terrifying power! Wu Qi could not describe the result of his calculation. It was a realm that he could not understand at the moment. Even though he had calculated the result, it was the same as the mysterious and unpredictable heavenly Tao. The result was right in his divine soul, but he could not let himself see it clearly. It was not a power that Wu Qi could touch now. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi calmed his mind and followed King Yang Qiu through the square. Under each totem pillar stood a group of ministers of Deyu, clad in black robes and tall crowns. The territory of Deyu dynasty was almost boundless, and it required an extremely large bureaucratic system to manage such a vast territory. Today, hundreds of thousands of officials from Liangzhu were greeting Wu Qi and his company in the square. From the highest-ranking princes and ministers to the officials of various palaces, departments, hundreds of thousands of officials stood quietly under the stone pillars, watching Wu Qi and his company walk across the square. Far in the distance, someone was humming an ancient ballad. The tune was simple, and so were the lyrics. It was a song sung by a woman who stayed at home to miss her husband who had been killed in a war. Over and over again, the tune spread throughout the square. Although it was a simple tune, it filled this part of the world with an indescribable sense of sacredness. Led by the 12 great elders, Wu Qi and his company came to the high steps in front of Yuxiong Palace, then knelt down on the mottled square. An old man with a tall, dignified face, clad in a gorgeous black robe embroidered with the patterns of mountains, rivers, and stars, and adorned with various jade ornaments, stood at the top of the steps, slowly unrolling a thick scroll with both hands. It was in this scroll that Deyu had conferred titles to Wu Qi and his company. Chapter 716. By the human emperor's decree, King Yang Qiu, Gao, son of King Yang Shan, has slain the demon immortal sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance and captured his son, Li Qinghua. For his meritorious service, he will be promoted to King Yufeng, and his fief will be expanded to 20 provinces. He may choose 4 sons to be conferred the title of 9th grade Marquis of Province. Yang Qiu Fengbua, a subordinate of King Yang Qiu, has captured the sovereign's son, Li Qinghua. For his meritorious service, he will be conferred the title of 3rd grade Marquis of Tang Province, and will be in charge of all the affairs in Tang Province. Tan Lang, a subordinate of King Yang Qiu, has killed the demon immortal sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance. For his meritorious service, he will be conferred the title of 3rd grade Marquis of East Sea Province, and his territory, East Sea County, will be expanded to a 3rd grade East Sea Province. Wu Qi will be in charge of all the affairs in East Sea Province, and will not be under the control of Zhong Province. Wu Qi and the others knelt at the foot of the high stone steps, listening to the old man slowly read out the rewards on the scroll. King Yang Qiu's face was flushed with excitement, and his fists were clenched so tightly that the veins on the back of his fists bulged. Yang Qiu Fengbua, on the other hand, was trembling with excitement. The Marquis of Tang Province, a 3rd grade Marquis of Tang Province. Their clan had been servants for generations, and now that he was conferred the title of Marquis, even though he was still nominally a servant of King Yang Qiu's clan, he had formed his own clan, and his status and honor were completely different. Wu Qi was delighted to be conferred the title of 3rd grade Marquis of East Sea Province. With this title, it would be much easier for him to do things. Besides, the current East Sea Province was a wasteland, with a sparsely populated territory of only a few million people. It was not even comparable to a well-developed county in Deyu Province. Now that the human emperor had conferred him the title of 3rd grade Marquis of East Sea Province and expanded the East Sea County into a 3rd grade East Sea Province, at least the population problem in East Sea Province would be solved by the Imperial Court of Deyu Province for Wu Qi, and large-scale immigration was just around the corner. As for Yang Qiu Fengbua's 3 brothers, as well as King Yang Qiu's subordinates who had made meritorious contributions in the war, they were all conferred the titles of Marquis of County, ranging from 1st to 9th grade. These captains were equally excited. If they were not in Yuxiong Palace, they would have been cheering loudly. With the title of nobility, they didn't care about the money, beauties, horses, treasured swords, and so on. With the title of nobility, he would have a territory under his direct jurisdiction and great authority. Wouldn't he be able to get as many of these worldly possessions as he wanted? Gao, the former King Yang Qiu and now King Yufeng, had also given Yugu a great deal of credit. Because of Yugu's status and prowess as a supreme oracle, he was granted the position of elder of Deyu's secret palace, which gave him great authority, and he could choose 2 of his descendants to be conferred with the title of 9th grade Marquis of Province. But Yu Qingsheng was the only one who was given the title of Marquis of County. King Yufeng was annoyed by Gao, so he only gave Yu Qingsheng a small share of the credit. What's more, he was rewarded with a meager amount of gold, silver, jewelry, beautiful women, and servants, as well as a fine manor outside Liangzhu and hundreds of thousands of acres of fertile land nearby. Apart from that, Yu Qingsheng did not get any other benefits. Yu Qingsheng's face turned black with anger when he saw that Wu Qi had been conferred the title of Marquis of Province, and even a few of King Yang Qiu's bodyguards had been conferred the title of Marquis of County, but Yu Qingsheng was still a nobody. The titles of King of Deyu Dynasty were divided into 4 grades: Mountain, Water, Prefecture, and City. The titles of King of Mountain were further divided into 4 grades: Mountain, Peak, Qiu, and Ridge. The titles of King of Water were also divided into 4 grades: Sea, River, Lake, and River. The titles of King of Province were divided into 9 grades and 18 grades according to the 4 kinds of seals: Jade, Gold, silver, and copper, and the 5 colors of ribbons: purple, green, red, black, and white. Among the 3 grades of king of mountain, water, and province, the titles of mountain and water were only conferred to the members of the imperial clan, while the titles of king of province could be conferred to the members of the imperial clan, the sons of influential clans, and even the civil and military officials of civilian origin. The titles of king of city, on the other hand, were only conferred to the civil and military officials of civilian origin. Moreover, the titles of king of mountain, water, and province were conferred to the descendants of the imperial clan, while the titles of king of province could be conferred to the members of the imperial clan, the sons of influential clans, and even the civil and military officials of civilian origin. If the descendants of the titles of king of city failed to make great contributions and defend the titles of king inherited by their ancestors, their titles would be reduced to the 9th grade marquis of county. In Dayu, it was easy for the sons of the imperial clan to be conferred the title of king, but the civil and military officials from influential clans and civilian origin could not be conferred the title of king unless they had made great contributions. Below the title of king was the title of marquis. There were only 3 grades of marquis: province, city, and marquis. Each grade was divided into 9 grades. Similarly, seals made of different materials and ribbons of different colors were used to determine the level of status. A marquis of province could have the territory of a province, and the grade corresponded to the grade of the province he ruled. For example, the current prefecture magistrate of Zhong Prefecture, Bo Zhongfu, was a first-grade marquis of Zhong Prefecture. If a marquis of province wanted to raise the grade of his family, he could either work hard on government affairs and develop a 9th-grade province from a barren land into a prosperous place like a first-grade province, and his title of marquis of province would naturally rise. Or if a marquis of province could make enough contributions, the human emperor of Dayu would naturally raise his title of marquis, allowing him to directly become an official in another province. This was also the only way to raise one's title of marquis. A marquis of city was also known as a marquis of province, and could have the territory of a province. According to the wealth and population of a province, the provinces of Dayu were also divided into 9 grades, and the 9 grades of marquis of province corresponded to the 9 grades of marquis of province. If a marquis of province wanted to raise his title of marquis of province, he could either work hard to develop the economy and population, or work hard to make contributions. Apart from that, Marquis of Province and Marquis of Province also had a way to raise his title of Marquis of Province. If he had a good daughter in his family, if she was selected to enter the imperial palace and conferred as a concubine, his title of Marquis of Province would also be raised. Great Yu's 9th-grade marquis, like Yu Miao, was actually a general who led an army stationed in various strategic locations. They were either stationed in some immortal pass or outer heavenly realm, and the grade of Marquis of Province was determined according to the importance of the area they were stationed in and the number of soldiers under their command. The Marquis of Dayu had their own fiefdoms, and they could decide everything in their fiefdoms at will, including all the people in the military court and the Directorate of Celestials, who were all their retainers. Even the marquis of the lowest status, who had the smallest fiefdoms, could do whatever they wanted in their fiefdoms, including building an army. As long as one could afford it, one could recruit an unlimited number of soldiers and buy horses. As long as one did not violate the various prohibitions and edicts issued by the human emperor, one could even issue his own decree at will. For example, the people in the fiefdom were only required to eat 1 meal a day or 10 meals a day, and those who violated the decree would have their entire families executed. No one would say a word about such absurd and unruly decrees. The Marquis of Dayu, on the other hand, only had their own fiefdoms. The Marquis of Province and Marquis of Province could inherit the right to rule a province or a county, but this province or county was directly under the jurisdiction of the human emperor. The imperial court of Dayu had the right to supervise the provinces and counties under their rule, and the imperial court of Dayu could also place a few officials in their fiefdoms from time to time, or send a few Marquis of Province and army to be stationed in their fiefdoms. The Marquis of Province and Marquis of Province must obey the laws of Dayu, and they must pay a huge amount of tribute to the imperial court of Dayu at fixed intervals. As for the Marquis of Province, they did not even have a fiefdom. The territory they controlled was the territory where their army was stationed. If they were sent to outer heavenly realms, they would have to suffer the wrath of the immortal officials of the celestial court and those powerful itinerant immortals. Every year, Yu lost a large number of Marquis of Province, just like Yu Miao, who was killed by Wu Qi. Generally speaking, Yu could not retaliate for the deaths of these Marquis. After all, outer heavenly realms were not Yu's territory. The vast system of Marquis and King, as well as the fiefdoms and territories of various sizes, were like a huge spider web that covered the entire vast territory of Yu. King Yang Qiu was originally the third of the 4 grades of king, namely mountain, peak, hill, and ridge. Now that he had been promoted to the 2nd grade, in addition to the elevation of his status in the imperial clan and the increase of his right to speak, the most direct benefit for him was the expansion of his fiefdom. On top of that, he could now choose 4 of his sons to be conferred as 9th grade Marquis of Province, which was also a great reward. Among his trusted generals, Yang Xiufengbua and Wu Qi were conferred the title of Marquis of Province, more than 1,000 were conferred the title of Marquis of County, and more than 10,000 military officers were conferred the title of Marquis of Province. This was a great expansion for King Yang Qiu's power. Putting aside the fact that Wu Qi and Yang Xiufengbua held the power of 2 provinces, which allowed King Yang Qiu's hand to extend further and further, what did it mean to have over 10,000 Marquis of Province? Even the Marquis of Province with the fewest troops was in charge of at least an army. Even if only a few of these Marquis of Province could stay on Panga continent, the army under their command would be no small matter. How could their influence over the place be ordinary? When these Marquis of Province were sent to their respective military towns, immortal passes, and outer heavenly realms, and when they took control of the armies in their own territories, King Yang Qiu's influence in Yu's army would increase significantly. All in all, killing the sovereign and wiping out the alliance had brought King Yang Qiu great benefits. From one of the many mediocre princes of Yu's imperial clan, he had become a rare star in the last tens of thousands of years, and both his power and influence had been greatly enhanced. On the high stone steps, the dignified old man slowly read out the rewards for Gao's subordinates. Although he omitted the details of the rewards for more than 10,000 Marquis of Province, it took him more than 8 hours to read out the rewards for Wu Qi and more than 1,000 military officers. Wu Qi and his companions had entered Liangzhu early in the morning, but it was already dusk, and the rewards were only coming to an end. However, Yu's imperial palace was always illuminated by the sun and the moon, so there was no distinction between day and night here. With their strong fleshly bodies, Wu Qi and his companions did not feel tired no matter how long they knelt on the ground. After more than 8 hours, the rewards were finally over. Led by the 12 great elders, Wu Qi and his companions walked slowly up the steps and into Yuxiong Palace. Next to Wu Qi and his companions, the ministers of Yu who were qualified to enter Yuxiong Palace also lined up silently. The dark entrance of Yuxiong Palace was right in front of them. For some reason, Wu Qi felt that it was the mouth of a monster. An extremely ancient aura slowly spread out of the great hall, and when Wu Qi came to the entrance, he could not help but hold his breath. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi followed the crowd into the center of power of one of the 2 most powerful powers in the world, the land that ruled over Panga continent, this magical land. As soon as he entered Yuxiong Palace, Wu Qi saw the man sitting on the throne at the end of the hall. Chapter 717. There were no spatial restrictive spells deployed in Yuxiong Palace. Measuring 3 miles wide from east to west and 1 mile deep from north to south, there were no pillars or beams in the Great Hall, which stood 1,000 feet tall and was almost transparent. The light of the sun, the moon, and the stars, mixed with a strong purple mist, poured down through the roof and converged into a silver-purple stream of light that looked like a dragon, enveloping the tall throne in the north of the Great Hall. The present human emperor of Yu, Emperor Haozuan, sat upright on the throne that stood more than 100 feet tall, looking down at the crowd. It had been 3 periods since Emperor Haozuan ascended to the throne. During this period, he had neither expanded nor defended his territory well enough. Under his rule, the forces of itinerant cultivators and itinerant immortals had gradually infiltrated Panga continent, and the conservative forces in Dayu had been very critical of him. Fortunately, he had taken advantage of the chaos in Myriad Immortal Alliance to carry out a great purge of the itinerant cultivator powers in Great Yu, and even the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, a primordial immortal, was killed. This was the only political achievement Emperor Haozuan had made in the past 3 periods, so he had rewarded King Yang Qiu, Wu Qi, and the others. Emperor Haozuan had a delicate face, fair skin, and 3 strands of long beard growing under his chin that reached his chest. He was clad in a simple white linen robe, with a pale green ribbon made of some unknown fine silk tied around his waist. Shrouded in the silver-purple light, Emperor Haozuan, who was tall and slim, with his eyes slightly narrowed, still had the demeanor of an emperor. With Wu Qi's ability to judge people, he could tell from his appearance that Emperor Haozuan seemed to be a little indecisive. But, how could a man of 3 periods be indecisive when he was able to sit on the throne of the human emperor, and when he was under the attack of the conservative forces in Dayu? How could he be a simple and benevolent person? In particular, Emperor Haozuan's cultivation technique shocked Wu Qi even more. Emperor Haozuan's skin was fair and delicate, and it gave off a very thin, almost translucent feeling. Through his skin, one could see a thumb-sized silver vortex spinning rapidly in each of the 360 most important acupuncture points on his body, flickering like stars. Yuxiong Plain was the heart of Panga continent, where the concentration of natural energy was more than 1,000 times that of other places. Liangzhu was the heart of Yuxiong Plain, where the concentration of natural energy was more than 10,000 times that of other places, and Dayu's imperial palace was the heart of Liangzhu, where the concentration of natural energy had reached an incredible level. On the other hand, Yuxiong Palace was the absolute core of the imperial palace, the control hub of all the formations in the palace. 30% of the essence of the sun, moon, and stars that shone in the sky above the palace was poured directly into it. But in Yuxiong Palace, apart from the throne where Emperor Haozuan sat, there was not even a wisp of natural energy. All the natural energy, Panga's sacred energy, and the essence of the sun, moon, and stars were absorbed into Emperor Haozuan's body. The 360 silver vortexes under his skin rapidly devoured the spiritual energy from the outside world. They devoured as much as they came, without the slightest pause. Emitting a faint, mysterious, and majestic silver light, the vortexes transformed into a silver halo that enveloped Emperor Haozuan. Set off by the silver halo, Emperor Haozuan, who looked as elegant as an immortal, looked as lofty as a deity, and naturally exuded a mighty aura that no one dared to look directly at. Wu Qi only stole a glance at Emperor Haozuan, then immediately looked away. Emperor Haozuan's cultivation base had reached a realm that Wu Qi could not fathom at the moment. Just by looking at him, Wu Qi's divine soul felt a pressure as heavy as a mountain. Overwhelmed, his divine soul groaned. He was afraid that if he looked at Emperor Haozuan for too long, his divine soul would be severely injured. The fearsome Emperor Haozuan, the fearsome body-tempering technique of Dayu's imperial clan. With just a quick glance, Wu Qi had determined the essence of Emperor Haozuan's cultivation technique, using Panga's sacred energy as the foundation to forge an extremely strong fleshly body like the true body of heaven and earth scripture, and using the essence of the sun, moon, and stars as the foundation to cultivate all kinds of divine abilities and mystic arts. The essence of the sun was the purest of yang, and the essence of the moon was the purest of yin. The combination of yin and yang, with the essence of billions of stars as the foundation, gave rise to countless changes. It was a complicated and mysterious supreme divine ability. Obviously, Emperor Haozuan also had the aptitude to cultivate both fleshly body and magic. It was very likely that the prerequisite for him to become the human emperor was to cultivate both fleshly body and magic. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to cultivate this miraculous cultivation technique. Of course, it was also possible that the imperial clan of Dayu had other secret cultivation techniques that did not require the aptitude to cultivate both fleshly body and magic. Naturally, there would be other cultivation techniques for the human emperor to choose from. Wu Qi did a quick calculation and found that the amount of natural energy that poured into Yuxiong Palace every day was equal to the total amount of immortal energy in a large immortal energy vein. It had been 3 periods since Emperor Haozuan became the human emperor. If he had spent 1/3 of his time cultivating in Yuxiong Palace, the magic power he possessed would be an astonishing number. Perhaps in terms of magic power alone, even an ordinary primordial immortal was not as strong as Emperor Haozuan. Perhaps this was the privilege that the human emperor should enjoy. In Wu Qi's opinion, even if a wild boar was placed on Emperor Haozuan's throne and was tempered by the essence of heaven for 3 periods, its cultivation base should be pretty good. Although it might not be comparable to a primordial immortal, it should at least be no different from a peak-level gold immortal. Led by the 12 great elders, Wu Qi and the others who had just been conferred the title slowly stepped forward and bowed to Emperor Haozuan in front of the throne. Although the etiquette of Deyu was conservative and old-fashioned, it had one advantage. Apart from kowtowing when offering sacrifices to heaven and earth, ghosts, deities, and ancestors, and kneeling during some important ceremonies, such as conferring titles, even when meeting the human emperor, he only bowed slightly or cupped his fist. After all, Deyu had inherited the tradition of the ancient tribal alliance, and the human emperor's predecessor was only the leader of the alliance. Wu Qi liked these etiquettes of Deyu very much. Otherwise, if he had to kneel and salute every time he saw a superior, how would he have the interest to mingle in the imperial court of Deyu? Hundreds of courtiers who were qualified to enter Yuxiong Palace walked slowly into the Great Hall and bowed to Emperor Haozuan. The Great Hall was quiet, and only the old man who had just read the conferring document walked up to the throne and completed the last step of the ceremony. Emperor Haozuan's fingers moved slightly, and the conferring scroll flew back into his hand. Then, many eunuchs in black came out of the back of the hall with small steps, carrying black lacquer plates on which were placed many seals, ribbons, medallions, and official documents. At the old man's order, these eunuchs came quickly to Wu Qi and his companions, then put the seals, ribbons, medallions, and official documents on them. This was also part of the old-fashioned tradition of Deyu. Before Wu Qi and his companions received their rewards, they were just ordinary generals who were not qualified to enter Yuxiong Palace, let alone meet Emperor Haozuan. So, they received their rewards at the stone steps outside the Great Hall. Only when they were at least conferred the title of Marquis did they enter the Great Hall, accompanied by many elders and ministers, to meet the human emperor, and formally receive their seals, ribbons, and other official documents. For most of the newly conferred marquises present, this was probably the only chance they had in their lives to meet the human emperor. In the future, unless they made new contributions and were promoted to the title of nobility, or became a king and qualified to meet the human emperor, they would never have the chance to enter the imperial palace of Deyu again. Every time the eunuchs helped a person put on a ribbon, seal, and a medallion that represented their status, Emperor Haozuan, sitting on the throne, would say a faint word of encouragement, then point a finger at the person and send a beam of light into the person's body. The beam of light contained extremely powerful Pangu's sacred energy and the essence of the stars. Pangu's sacred energy could strengthen the cultivation base of the fleshly body, and the essence of the stars could strengthen the soul. Pangu's sacred energy could strengthen the fleshly body, and none of the generals around Wu Qi was weak. But, strengthening the soul was equivalent to prolonging the lifespan of these generals, which was also the reward the newly conferred marquises deserved. Without saying a word, Wu Qi digested the beam of light that entered his body, while the essence of the stars was fused into Dark Yin Celestial Tower. The essence of the stars refined in Yuxiong Palace was extraordinarily pure, and with it as a supplement, the power of the 360 star pearls in Dark Yin Celestial Tower skyrocketed, giving the tower a great advantage. After another round of work, everyone had completed the last step of the conferring ceremony. According to the normal procedure, the human emperor would grant them a banquet, then they would thank him and leave Yuxiong Palace. After that, they would have a feast, and then they would leave the imperial palace immediately. But today, Emperor Haozuan had disrupted the procedure. Just as the old man, who was giving orders from the side, was about to announce the end of the conferring ceremony and ask everyone to thank him and leave Yuxiong Palace for the banquet, Emperor Haozuan raised his hand slightly. His slightly narrowed eyes opened, and 2 beams of silver light fell abruptly on Wu Qi. Tan Lang, the Marquis of East Sea Province. The aptitude to cultivate both fleshly body and magic. All the ministers of Deyu in the Great Hall looked at Emperor Haozuan in astonishment, but the emperor ignored their astonishment and said slowly, "I know it was you who laid out the formation, lured immortal Ding Jun into it, and killed him. Go to the Directorate of Celestials and pick a supreme tower, then go to the secret palace of Yen Tian Palace and make 3 copies of the secret manuals of the Tao of Formations and take them away." Wu Qi was taken aback. Emperor Haozuan had actually given him such a great benefit for no reason. Before Wu Qi could recover from his shock, the emperor turned to Gao, nodded, and said, "Gao, the son of King Yangshan. Good, very good, you do have some of your father's spirit. You have made a great contribution this time, which has boosted Deyu's prestige and taught those immortals who are getting bolder and bolder a lesson. Very well, from now on, you will follow the imperial court and assist in military affairs. I will leave the right army of Yu Xiong in Liangzhu to you for the time being, and see if you can be put in an important position." Gao, the former King Yang Qiu, who was now King Yu Feng, blushed abruptly. He hurriedly took a few steps forward, bowed deeply to Emperor Haozuan, and said with a loud voice, "I understand. I will do my best and not let your majesty down." Emperor Haozuan smiled faintly and waved his hand. Immediately, all the courtiers bowed to him, then slowly left Yu Xiong Palace. Suddenly, Wu Qi felt 2 malicious gazes coming at him from the crowd. He turned his head and looked in the direction of the gazes, and saw King Zhangqiu turn his head away as if nothing had happened. Wu Qi smiled. "So, this is my new enemy." Chapter 718. In short, the dishes served in Deyu's banquet were the same as how the ancient ancestors ate. Wu Qi saw a black-robed old man sitting opposite him. He must be a high-ranking oracle from the Directorate of Celestials, who had a very high status. In front of him was a large jade basin, in which were 3 large cabbages that had been boiled in water. The cabbages were not uprooted or chopped, but were simply cooked and served. Frowning, Wu Qi cut off a piece of meat that looked like the skin of an old cow with a jade knife that was not very sharp. Then, he stuffed the meat, which was still stained with blood, into his mouth. An indescribable stench rushed up from his mouth, and Wu Qi was so disgusted that he almost threw up. But, this was the banquet given by the human emperor, and no one dared to be rude. Wu Qi could only gnash his teeth and chew the tough meat. The friction between his teeth and the old tendons in the meat produced a loud creaking noise. The young man was just a civil official, and he had neither cultivated his fleshly body nor magic. He was just an ordinary man. How could he endure so much horrible food? Without delicious food, there was naturally no good wine. The wine here was brewed according to the oldest winemaking recipe. It was the most primitive low-alcohol wine brewed by the ancient ancestors with clay pots, and even the lees were not removed. It had a pungent sour smell, as unpleasant as over-fermented vinegar. If he were to drink it in his mouth, he really could not describe the feeling. It was sour, floating, and strange, as if it was about to explode in his mouth. Also, when he swallowed the wine with his neck stretched, the feeling was as slow as a razor scraping his throat. It was a wonderful feeling. This was perhaps the most tasteless meal Wu Qi had had since he came to Panga continent. While stuffing wine and meat into his mouth, he tilted his head sideways and glanced at the important ministers and nobles of Deyu, laughing in his heart. Turning his head to look at Yu Xiong Palace, who was lying on the stone steps like a monster, Wu Qi cursed in his mind. No wonder Emperor Haozuan refused to move from his throne and did not attend the banquet. Perhaps he is afraid of this terrible banquet. Slowly swallowing a piece of stinking meat, Wu Qi breathed a suppressed sigh. Although there was no good wine or delicious food, the banquet given by Deyu was still entertained by musicians and singers. However, when the ancestors of the ancient times gathered to drink and feast, it was also a time for them to remember their ancestors and their dead brothers and sisters. Generally speaking, unless it was an important sacrificial ceremony, the ancient ancestors would not gather together to enjoy precious good wine and feast on meat for no reason. Amidst the green flame, countless men clad in black robes were seen sitting silently under the huge, gloomy totem poles, chewing on bloody meat, big potatoes, cabbages, and all sorts of strange and bizarre foods happily. Next to them was a large group of female singers clad in white robes, singing all sorts of ghostly ballads in a grief-stricken manner. The scene made Wuqi want to burst into laughter, but at the same time, he wanted to cry at the same time. While chewing the meat, Gao whispered to Wuqi, "Eat slowly, eat slowly." The etiquette of the banquet is based on the sacrificial ceremony of the ancient times. When the food in front of you is finished, you will have another serving immediately, so eat slowly as much as possible. But, before the banquet is about to end, you must eat all the food in front of you, or you will be charged with great disrespect, and your title will be stripped. Emperor Haozuan's banquet was not delicious. In the huge square, under the 36,000 huge totem poles, under the green light, countless courtiers of Deyu were tearing at the bloody meat with a straight face, their mouths filled with loud cracking noises of beast tendons being torn off. Among them, a large group of sanctimonious oracles and civil officials were holding half-cooked potatoes the size of a human head and whole cabbages with gloomy faces, munching on them. For some reason, Wuqi felt that the scene was creepy, bizarre, and filled with a sense of absurdity and hilarity. His other sons were killed in battle decades ago, said Gao in a flat voice. Wuqi gave the young man a pitying look, then lowered his head and began to cut the meat in front of him that weighed more than 10 kilograms. Among those who were enjoying the banquet, apart from Wuqi and his men, who had strong fleshly bodies and strong teeth, most of them were oracles or civil servants of the court, who had weak fleshly bodies. It was impossible for these people to deal with the meat of these demonic beasts, so their food was boiled potatoes, vegetables, and the like. Furthermore, the potatoes were not peeled, and the vegetables were not rooted. All the dishes were boiled in water, sprinkled with a bit of salt, and served neatly on the plate. With Deyu's policy of encouraging fertility, and the fact that the High Oracle was an important minister of the court, he must have at least hundreds of concubines. How could he have only one son? Slowly swallowing the fishy meat in his mouth, Wuqi turned his eyes to a short and shriveled oracle, who was picking up a few boiled carrots from a jade basin with a frown and slowly chewing on them. Wuqi nearly burst out laughing. A stream of half-congealed demon blood sprayed out from the corner of Wuqi's mouth and landed on Gao's armor. However, Gao did not show any reaction. Numbly, he raised the coarse jade knife, clenched his jaws, and shoved the meat into his mouth with the grief of a warrior who would never return. Wuqi turned his head and saw a few eunuchs carrying a basin full of boiled potatoes and placing them in front of a pale-faced young man with a smile on their faces. The young man's face was stained with the smell of potatoes. With difficulty, he took a look at the potatoes in front of him, his body trembling slightly. So, this was the human emperor's feast after the conferring ceremony of Deyu? No wonder Yang Xiufengbua and the others were so excited when they talked about being conferred the title of Marquis, but when they talked about the feast after the conferring ceremony, their expressions became even weirder. Only son. Wuqi stared at Gao in astonishment. The old man was the great oracle of Deyu, who was in charge of the preparation and operation of all the important ceremonies of Deyu. It was said that every great oracle of Deyu was selected from the elders of the wealthy and noble clans by drawing lots, and none of the great oracle's daughters could get married, and none of the sons could get married. Presumably, this had something to do with the feast of Deyu. Gao burped with a foul breath and murmured in a low voice, "So, eat slowly, eat slowly." TSK, it's obvious that this is the first time for that fool to attend the feast, and no one has taught him this trick. Everyone just wants to see someone suffer misfortune. Speechless, Wuqi cut off a piece of meat, which was still bright red, and slowly stuffed it into his mouth. Just by looking at the great oracle's twisted face, and then at the angry gazes of all the courtiers and generals present, Wuqi knew how offensive the position of great oracle was. The problem was, there was a complete set of etiquette for the feast of Deyu. Before the etiquette was completed, even the most powerful king under the human emperor was not allowed to leave his seat. Looking at the sun slowly setting in the west, Wuqi felt like weeping but had no tears. It was only dusk now, and the feast could only be completed at midnight. Heavens above, and Lady of Earth below, how many kilograms of this uncooked demonic beast meat would he eat today? Crunch! Crunch! Like eating machines, the courtiers of Deyu moved their big teeth in unison, slowly digesting the food in front of them. These demon beasts who provided the meat had gained sentience and cultivated into human forms. They were carnivorous demon beasts specially raised by Deyu dynasty. Most of the beast-born monsters didn't have much magical powers, but their fleshly bodies were extremely powerful. Since these demon beasts could cultivate into human forms, they must have cultivated for at least 1,000 years, and their muscles were even stronger than steel ingots. If it were not for the fact that Wuqi's fleshly body was stronger, someone with a slightly weaker cultivation base would have his teeth torn off by the meat. Even the generals who liked to drink to their heart's content had turned into gentlemen at the feast of the human emperor. They would never drink unless it was absolutely necessary. But the old man who presided over the feast, the one who read the letter of conferment to Wuqi and the others, would raise his wine cup and toast to everyone every 10 minutes, and everyone present would have to raise their wine cups and drink with him. It was simply the greatest torture in the world. Yang Xiufengbua, who was standing off to one side, burped and murmured in a low voice. When His Highness attended the feast for the first time, he didn't know what was going on, so he ordered a plate of meat and ate it. In the end, he ate the meat and guts of 7 one-horned flaming bulls, and was scolded by Master Lao Wang when he returned to the mansion. Gao gave Wuqi a look, patted him on the shoulder, and said with a sigh, "Every subject of Deyu hopes to be conferred a title of nobility by making meritorious contributions, and everyone who is conferred a title of nobility hopes to have their title elevated. But the feast after the ceremony." Shaking his head, Gao said in a cold voice, "It is said that the only son of the current High Oracle is serving in the right army of Yuxiong. I'll assign him a mission that will cost him his life." The feast of the human emperor of Deyu had always followed the tradition of the ancient times. The ancient people struggled in the wilderness, so naturally, they were not particular about food. Therefore, the food and wine served at the feast left everyone speechless. The source of the meat was excellent. All the meat was chosen from the fattest parts of the demonic beasts that had matured. All the meat was of the highest quality. However, no matter how high the quality of the ingredients was, it was only stewed in plain water with a little bit of salt. There were still traces of blood on the surface of the meat, and there were even drops of blood dripping down. This was definitely not a good meal. If Emperor Haozuan had to attend every feast in person, the subjects of Deyu might only attend a few banquets in their entire lives. But, even if Emperor Haozuan only conferred a title to his subjects every 100 years, how many times would he have to attend such a dreadful feast in the span of 3 periods? But, according to the ancient etiquette, the feast must last until midnight. Therefore, these musicians and singers were performing the requiem, funeral song, soul-summoning song, song of remembrance, and so on, which the ancient ancestors used to commemorate their ancestors and their fallen clansmen during sacrificial ceremonies. The tunes of these songs were gloomy and sorrowful, and the lyrics were eerie and ghostly. In particular, the singers they chose were all the best singers with faces as white as snow and did not have any good looks. Only their voices were sharp and thin. Chapter 719. Walking with stiff legs and staring blankly, Wuqi slowly followed a group of senior ministers of Deyu down the mountain formed by Torch Dragon's coiled body. From time to time, deep, powerful, and long burps could be heard amidst the long stream of people, filling the air with the pungent smell of urine and blood. From time to time, weak oracles and civil officials could be heard groaning, as their stomachs were too full. As he walked, Wuqi looked back at Yuxiong Palace, which was crouching on the top of the mountain like a monster. The banquet given by the human emperor of Deyu looked like a joke, absurd to the extreme. But, such an absurd banquet had been going on since ancient times. None of the civil and military officials in the imperial court, even the elders of the allied tribes, princes, and members of the imperial clan had commented on the banquet. Generations of Dayu officials had been gnawing on half-cooked meat and whole cabbages, continuing the tradition to this day. Terrible traditions and stubborn customs. After this banquet, Wu Qi suddenly felt that Dayu was a solid rock that had stubbornly maintained its original style. No matter how time went by, no matter how the world changed, it would always be the same. Wu Qi secretly glanced at the civil and military officials around him. Except for Gao and his generals, although the others did not feel well in their stomachs, they all wore the same indifferent expressions. One could even use the word indifferent to describe their expressions. For them, although the taste of the banquet was a little unpleasant, it was a tradition, and they had to abide by it. Just like how humans needed to breathe and fish could not live without water, these ministers of Dayu could not live without these traditions. What a terrible kingdom, and what a terrible man. Wu Qi sighed inwardly. When a tradition became a habit, it was the most terrible force in the world. As the long stream of people slowly walked down the mountain, a few oracles in black cloaks suddenly appeared on the side of the road. They stopped in front of Wu Qi and murmured in a low voice, "Tan Lang, Marquis of East Sea Province. Come with us. The human emperor has decreed that you may enter the secret palace of Yen Tian." Narrowing his eyes abruptly, Gao grabbed Wu Qi's wrist and whispered into his ear, "The secret palace has countless mystic arts and divine abilities, all of which are extremely powerful. The most profound divine abilities of Dayu are not in the Directorate of Celestials, but in the secret palace of the Imperial Palace. There are countless immortal formation diagrams and the secrets of my Dayu formation in the Yen Tian Palace. You must choose carefully." Gao and Wu Qi only exchanged a few words with each other, and under the gloomy gazes of the few oracles, he had no choice but to follow the group and leave. The secret palace had a very high status in Dayu. It was mysterious and terrifying, and it was the place where all supreme oracles ended their lives. It was responsible for sorting out and safekeeping all the books and records of Dayu, and bore the heavy responsibility of continuing the dynasty of Dayu. Therefore, even the Council of Elders of the Tribal Alliance was in awe of the secret palace, and dared not to show the slightest disrespect to it. Perhaps, any old man who walked out of the secret palace could be the lineal ancestor of the current clan leader of some powerful clan in Dayu, or the grand magus of some powerful clan several generations ago, who were the spiritual leaders of these clans. With such a background, the status of the oracles of the secret palace was so honorable that even a king of the imperial clan like Gao dared not offend them. Under the guidance of the few oracles, Wu Qi followed them and left the only avenue in the imperial palace, heading deep into the woods. After parting the dense weeds and trudging through the dense forest full of poisonous insects for 2 hours, they came to a clearing in the woods, where a dozen oracles in white robes were waiting quietly in a circle. It was the first time Wu Qi saw oracles of Dayu dressed in white robes, and he could not help but give them a few more glances. These oracles looked young, in their 20s at most, but their sleeves were embroidered with patterns of suns, which showed that they were all sun oracles, which meant that they all had the overall strength to fight against gold immortals. But, judging from their expressions, their ignorance and immaturity, their ages were definitely not beyond Wu Qi's estimation. Was this the background of the secret palace? Sun oracles in their early 20s? Wu Qi grinned. An immortal had to start his cultivation from the stage of immortal, from gold core, nascent soul, nascent divinity, and then heaven immortal, breaking through tier by tier, all the way until he became a gold immortal. Even a genius like Lady Dark Goldwater had to spend a very long period of time that could be counted in Yuanhui before she could achieve this. But how old were these young oracles of Dayu's secret palace? Yet, they already possessed the strength equivalent to a gold immortal who had spent eons of time cultivating. What a terrifying background. But, even in the secret palace, there shouldn't be too many freakish oracles like these, right? Led by a few black-robed oracles, Wu Qi walked into the circle formed by these white-robed oracles. The white-robed oracles cried out at the same time. Their fingers moved rapidly in the air, leaving a large sheet of phosphorescent light in the air. At the same time, they chanted a strange incantation, causing countless runes to pour out of their bodies along with thick smoke, forming a rune formation around Wu Qi with 18 layers of runes. Suddenly, the void twisted. Accompanied by a muffled cracking noise that sounded like thunder, Wuqi was surrounded by darkness as a strong pressure came pressing at him from all directions. When he could see the light again, he was already in front of a valley. A terrible storm was blowing out of the valley, and the wind was as sharp as blades, slashing and splashing sparks on the rocky ground in front of the valley. A few white-robed oracles pointed out their fingers and cast a thick layer of restrictive runes on Wuqi's body. An invisible wave enveloped Wuqi's body, and any gust of wind that came near him would be dissipated by the wave. Wuqi stared in surprise at the pale black storm that was blowing at his face. The wind here should be half natural and half artificially processed, or it could not be so terrible. Judging from the speed at which the few wind blades sliced past Wuqi and the degree of condensation, perhaps even an ordinary heaven immortal could not withstand them. Wuqi looked back over his shoulder. On the distant horizon, he could see the great mountain formed by the coiling torch dragon, and Yuxiong Palace, which was shrouded in a strong beam of light. They should still be in the garden of Deyu's imperial palace, but there should be many restrictive spells lying in ambush along the way. That was why these white-robed oracles had guided Wuqi directly to the entrance of the valley by breaking the void with a mystic technique. Following behind these oracles, Wuqi walked slowly against the strong wind. The terrible storm raged in his ears as the company gradually entered the valley. It was 100 miles high and only about 30 feet wide, with a tall and narrow entrance that looked like a black line. They walked along the dimly lit valley for a long time. Along the way, the white-robed oracles had used all kinds of restrictive spells, and they had spent countless tricks before they finally brought Wuqi out of the valley. A bright light shone in front of them, and the view suddenly became clear. A pitch-black cliff, about 100 miles high, appeared in front of Wuqi, tens of miles away from Wuqi. On both sides of the cliff were steep cliffs, and behind him, apart from the narrow valley, was another precipitous cliff. Gusts of strong wind rose out of the surrounding cliff walls, compressed by invisible restrictive spells and turned into countless pitch-black wind blades that thrust into the valley. After being compressed and accelerated by layers of restrictive spells in the valley, they turned into powerful windstorms and rushed out of the mountain. The cliff wall in front of them was about 100 miles high and 200 miles wide. Countless statues of celestial fiends were carved on it, with the shortest being about a mile tall. These celestial fiends were fighting each other, and there were also countless statues of primordial beasts involved in the battle. The statues were so lifelike that Wuqi could even hear the shrill howls and cries of the celestial fiends and beasts. Between the two largest celestial fiends in the middle, there was a square-shaped entrance, about 10 feet wide and 30 feet high, on the cliff wall. The entrance was about 30 miles above the ground, and from about a mile in front of Wuqi to the entrance was a very long stone staircase. The stone staircase was only about 10 feet wide and about 100 miles long, reaching straight to the entrance. Every single step was carved with countless complicated patterns, and innumerable ancient and mysterious spells. When Wuqi cast his eyes on the stone staircase, he could vaguely hear a shrill, strange laughter. A few black-robed oracles bowed slightly to Wuqi, then walked to a cliff wall on the left. There was another entrance under the cliff wall, and they walked into it and disappeared. Meanwhile, the white-robed oracles escorted Wuqi up the stone staircase, slowly walking towards the entrance on the cliff wall. As they walked higher and higher, the wind around them grew stronger and stronger. Even the restrictive spells cast on Wuqi by the white-robed oracles began to fail to withstand the attack of the wind. The invisible energy waves began to tremble, and strong gusts of wind brushed against Wuqi's body. Walking tens of miles above the ground, feeling the strong wind blowing against his body, Wuqi had an illusion that he was about to float up into the sky. After walking for less than an hour, the white-robed oracles secretly released all kinds of incantation gestures to temporarily remove the vicious restrictive spells on the stone steps. Wuqi silently memorized their incantation gestures, as well as the energy fluctuations they emanated. Deyu's secret palace. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely pay it a visit. It was said that the secret palace only stored all the ancient books and documents of Deyu, but who knew if there were any secret treasures or powerful weapons in it? When he came to the entrance at the end of the stone staircase, a few middle-aged oracles in white robes with black stripes on their sleeves suddenly appeared out of nowhere and stood in front of Wu Qi in a straight line. The middle-aged oracle in the middle smiled and held out his hand to Wu Qi. "Marquis of East Sea Province, please hand over the 3 animals you have. They are not allowed to enter the secret palace." The dragon python sisters, who had been following Wu Qi for more than a year and had been following him since he was in the valley, crept out of Wu Qi's ear, lay on Wu Qi's shoulder, and turned to look at Wu Qi. Ao Buzan, on the other hand, dashed out furiously. With a sway of his body, he grew to more than 30 feet long and as thick as a bowl. Pointing his finger at the oracle's nose, he cursed, "You are the animal. Your whole family are animals." Lao Tzu. With one hand, Wu Qi grabbed Ao Buzan's mouth and gave him a hard yank, turning his body from as thick as a bowl to as thin as a strand of hair. After that, he tied a very complicated bow over his mouth with his slender body, then handed Ao Buzan and the dragon python sisters to the middle-aged oracle. Looking deeply into the oracle's eyes, Wu Qi smiled and said, "Thank you, Tan Lang doesn't want them to be hurt." The middle-aged shaman smiled, nodded, and moved aside to make way for them. Chapter 720. He carefully told the middle-aged oracle not to let Ao Buzan and the dragon python sisters get hurt, then told Ao Buzan and the 2 dragon pythons not to cause any trouble when he was not around. After saying a lot of nonsense, Wu Qi was led into the secret palace by a few white-robed oracles. Just like the feeling that Yugu's supreme tower gave Wu Qi, the atmosphere inside De Yu's secret palace was gloomy, dark, and suffocating. Walking along the long tunnel, every step he took felt like he was treading on the history, and every step he took felt like he was treading on the torrent of time. Wu Qi could not describe his feelings. He only felt that everything was like a dream, not real. The walls along the way were carved with countless patterns, many of which were stories that Wu Qi was familiar with. When the white-robed oracles saw that Wu Qi was interested in the stories carved on the walls, they excitedly explained them to him in detail. From Pangu's creation of the world, to the Wahuang clan's creation of human beings, to Great Yu's control of the flood and killing of all the demons in the world, Wu Qi was very familiar with all kinds of stories. But, the stories told by these patterns were different from what Wu Qi knew, and there were many details that were worth considering. According to the stories that Wu Qi knew, Pangu was the first living being between heaven and earth, and he created the world because he was lonely. But, the carvings of Pangu's creation of the world puzzled Wu Qi. Pangu was standing in a hazy mist, holding a great axe and standing on a huge lotus throne. But, in the mist in the distance, Wu Qi could vaguely see countless people, who seemed to be watching the spectacular scene of Pangu creating the world. The story of the Wahuang clan's creation of human beings was even more different. What Wu Qi knew was that goddess Nviwa had molded him into the shape of a human using the living soil and innate water according to his own appearance. But in this place, the ancient great sages used the quintessence blood of countless mythological beasts as materials, and used their boundless magic power to fuse the quintessence blood of countless mythological beasts and mythological birds into one. Then, using the living soil as the foundation, they fused the living soil with the quintessence blood and took human form. What the Wahuang clan did was to take out countless spiritual essences from a strange-shaped cauldron and fuse them into her body. The ancient great sage created the human body, and the Wahuang clan injected the human soul. Vaguely, Wu Qi felt that the story was in line with some of the records found in some ancient books on Earth. In those records, it was also said that goddess Nuwa created the human race through the 72 transformations, and joined hands with some ancient gods to create the human race. As for the story of Yu the Great controlling the flood, it made Wu Qi even more conflicted. In the historical records on Earth, De Yu was the ancestor of the Xia dynasty. But here, Yu the Great was one of the 18 ancient sacred emperors of the De Yu dynasty. The flood he controlled was not a natural disaster, but a man-made disaster caused by some powerful existences from outer heavenly realms who invaded this world created by the great sage Pangu. Yu the Great's achievement was to lead the fledgling Deyu dynasty, reorganize its armaments, and join hands with the immortals who had just matured to kill those foreign existences. After that, in order to suppress some powerful creatures that he could not kill, Yu the Great extracted 9 dragon veins from Pangu continent, which were said to be transformed from the spine of the great sage Pangu, and used them to forge 9 cauldrons to suppress those terrible creatures. Along the way, Wu Qi was struck dumb by what he heard. He vaguely felt that these stories, which were very different from the myths and legends he knew, might be the truth of history. Since the ancient times, the dynasty of Deyu had lasted for a long time. All kinds of ancient records were well preserved, and there was an organization like the secret palace that was responsible for passing down the history. So, what these white-robed oracles were telling him should be the real history. Sighing softly, Wu Qi followed the white-robed oracles down the tunnel. There were countless forks along the way, each of which was of the same height, length, and brightness, and there were also countless bewitching restrictive spells and spatial barriers. Even with his current cultivation base and divine sense, Wu Qi could not remember the path these white-robed oracles had taken him through. In short, after walking for more than 4 hours, and with the strength of Wu Qi and his companions, as well as the various strange formations and teleportation formations along the way, they must have traveled tens of thousands of miles. Wu Qi was not even sure if he was still in the mountain behind the entrance, because there were dozens of teleportation formations, which gave him a feeling that he had broken through the void and traveled a very long distance. He had no idea where exactly he was. After struggling for a long time, a bright light suddenly shone from a pearl in front of them. Wu Qi and his company walked out of the dark and oppressive tunnel and came before an ancient, dark yellow copper door. The gate was surrounded by thick and heavy rocks, and thousands of fist-sized luminous pearls were mounted on the top of the 1-mile-tall rock ceiling, brightly illuminating the small square in front of the gate, which was dozens of acres in circumference. Countless patterns of stars were carved on the surface of the huge bronze gate, and in front of it, dozens of oracles, whose sleeves were embroidered with black patterns, were sitting cross-legged on the ground like Chi-Chi. These oracles were not breathing like zombies, and Wu Qi could not hear the sound of their heartbeat or blood flow. They should be living people, but they had fallen into some kind of deep sleep with some magic, which made them look no different from zombies in coffins. Walking past these oracles, Ji Hao came to the huge bronze gate. A white-robed oracle who led the way reached out his hand and pressed a few stars on the gate. Slowly, the 1,000 meters tall and 100 meters wide bronze gate began to rise. A gust of cold air came flowing out from behind the copper door, bringing with it a faint fragrance. Wu Qi recognized that it was the aroma of the blue-striped 1,000 leaves, which was used to preserve bamboo slips and wood slips, preventing them from rotting. Raising his head and looking at the slowly rising bronze gate, Wu Qi couldn't help but click his tongue. The gate was 1,000 meters tall, 100 meters wide, and 10 miles thick. How was this a door? It was clearly a copper pillar that was placed horizontally. Moreover, it was densely covered in countless talisman markings and embedded with a large amount of tortoise shells, precious pearls, crystals, jades, and so on. Obviously, all of them had their own uses. The few white-robed oracles opened the gate, but they did not go in. Instead, they signaled Wu Qi to go in alone. On the other side of the gate, an old man clad in a white robe was already waiting. The old man stood over 9 feet tall and thin like a bamboo pole. 6 tiny supreme towers were embroidered on the sleeves of his white robe with black silk threads, while a large number of stars were embroidered on his chest with pale silver silk threads. The 6 supreme towers represented the overall strength of a supreme oracle, and his cultivation base was strong enough to fight against a 4th-tier primordial immortal. On the other hand, the star pattern on his chest indicated that the old man's major cultivation base was the heavenly star transformation, as well as the secrets of various formations, and that he was a member of the secret palace, Yen Tian Palace. Among the star patterns on the old man's chest, the North Star near the Big Dipper was a pale golden color. Wu Qi's pupils constricted when he saw the pattern. The North Star was an extremely important star in the universe, and this pale golden pattern clearly represented the old man's position in Yen Tian Palace. "This is Lord Yuchen, the first master of Yen Tian Palace, a white-robed oracle said in a low voice. Lord Yu Chen. The first master of Yen Tian Palace? A member of the Yu clan? A member of the Yu clan in Liangzhu? Yu Mu's face instinctively flashed across Wu Qi's mind. He nodded to the few white-robed oracles around him, then came in front of Yu Chen in a flash. Yu Chen, who was a head taller than Wu Qi, looked down at Wu Qi, who was cupping his fist and bowing to him, and said coolly, Yu Mu is my grandson, Yu Huai is my grandson, and Yu Mu is my grandson. Are you Tan Lang? Wu Qi stared blankly at Yu Chen. Yu Mu, the current head of the Yu clan in Zhong province, was Yu Chen's grandson. Yu Chen, the son of Yu Chen, then the grandson, the great-grandson, the great-grandson, the great-grandson, the great-grandson, the great-grandson, the great-grandson, and the great-grandson. Should Wu Qi marvel at Yu Chen's seniority, or should he grieve for Yu Mu's seniority? For Wu Qi, Yu Mu was already an old monster, but Wu Qi was Yu Chen's grandson. The seniority of Yu Mu was simply too shocking. Bowing respectfully to Yu Chen, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, Junior Tan Lang offers greeting, Master Yu. A faint smile emerged on Yu Chen's face as he pointed a finger at the bronze door behind Wu Qi. The huge door fell silently to the ground. Then, he turned around and said in a low voice, Come with me. His Majesty is being too stingy by asking you to pick 3 ancient books of formations at will. Hee, if you can really comprehend the Tao of formations, I'll make a copy of all the ancient books in Yen Tian Palace for you. He snorted coldly, clasped his hands behind his back, and said proudly, If you are an idiot who can't even pass my test, you won't get anything from Yen Tian Palace, even with His Majesty's decree. Yu Chen wants to test my cultivation base in the Tao of formations? With a faint smile on his face, Wu Qi said in a slightly reserved and cautious manner, As you wish, Master Yu. Following Yu Chen, Wu Qi walked down the tunnel for hundreds of miles, and soon came to a vast underground space. Countless palaces of Qiqi were built in this space, which was over 1,000 miles in circumference and tens of miles in height. All of the palaces looked the same. They floated in the air according to the constellations in the sky, and they moved slowly in the air according to the changes in the starry sky. All the palaces were the same in size and appearance. If an outsider came here, he or she would not be able to tell which of these palaces was the key place of Yen Tian Palace. On the rock walls surrounding this space were countless small caves that could barely fit one's body. White-robed oracles of different ages were seen sitting cross-legged in some of these caves, holding calculating rods and some other calculating tools in their hands. There was not the slightest noise in this spacious space. Occasionally, the calculating rods in the hands of some oracles would collide with each other, or some other tools, such as tortoiseshell or jade tablets, thrown around by these oracles. In addition to these oracles who were meditating in seclusion on the rock walls, there was a large group of oracles huddled together on the flat ground beneath the floating palaces, drawing something on the ground with jade carving knives. As far as the eye could see, there were countless white-robed oracles sketching all kinds of spell formations and astrology diagrams on the ground within a radius of 1,000 miles. Yu Chen turned to look at Wu Qi. With a strange smile on his face, he said in a deep voice, I'll find you 3 opponents. They are all apprentice formation masters of Yen Tian Palace. If you can defeat them in the Tao of formations, I'll personally make a copy of all the books in Yen Tian Palace and give it to you. With a strange laugh, Yu Chen tilted his head and snorted coldly, If you lose, I'll kick you all the way out of this place. Do you think you can waste my time? Wu Qi paused for a moment, then said with a smile, As you wish, Master Yu. If he could not even defeat apprentices of Yen Tian Palace, Wu Qi would be too ashamed to live. Chapter 721. Wu Qi was struck dumb. Who were these old oracles? Just now, those oracles had created a hemispherical space with a diameter of about 1 mile, but with just a few dozens of lower-grade energy stones, they were able to extend the space by several hundred times. It was not a matter of their cultivation base, but that their understanding of formations had reached the realm of deva beings. The six-directional formation had abandoned the use of the power of the stars, and relied entirely on the energy of the earth veins. The six formation cores extracted the evil energy from the tiny energy veins underneath, and combined with the yin energy condensed from the six banners, it formed a pure yin-killing formation. In just a quarter of an hour, the three brothers, Gaochen Yin, Gaochen Hui, and Gaochen Yu, had each constructed a small formation on the ground. It was obvious that Elder Gaochen had the intention of making a name for them by picking the three young men from his clan. In front of the tens of thousands of oracles, the three brothers neatly constructed their respective formations. All the runes and patterns were in perfect order. Obviously, they had their own way of doing formations. Yuchen gently clapped his hands. The old man stopped drawing the formation, slowly straightened his back, and squinted at Yuchen. Wu Qi gave the three formation diagrams a glance, smiled faintly, then casually took out a lower-grade energy stone and crushed it into countless bean-sized energy stones. With a light flick of his finger, the first wave of 12 spirit stones shot out. 6 spirit stones blocked the formation eye that the six-wave formation used to extract the spirit energy from the earth veins. Then, it cut off the transmission of spirit energy between the six formation eyes. The yin energy rebounded and smashed the six-wave formation into pieces. A deep gleam flashed across Elder Gaochen's cloudy eyes as he stared at Wu Qi and began to chuckle strangely. Nodding slowly, he said, "The apprentice with the weakest cultivation base? Gaochen Yin, Gaochen Hui, and Gaochen Yu, you three brothers will play with the Marquis of East Sea Province." Yuchen chuckled. A few silver threads rushed out from under his feet, forming a simple teleportation rune on the ground. Wu Qi felt his body lighten. Yuchen had already brought him to the center of the square. An old man with messy hair and beard was holding a black jade dagger in his hand, sketching a complicated formation on the floor. About 100 white-robed oracles were either standing beside him or floating in the air, all of them focused on the patterns the old man was sketching with the tip of his dagger. Stunned, Wu Qi took a step back in fright. What are these people in the secret palace thinking? For a moment, tens of thousands of white-robed oracles from Yantian Palace, Chi-Chi, held their breaths and turned to look at Elder Gaochen at the same time. Following Elder Gaochen's words, 3 young men dressed in white priest robes strode out. As for the third wave of spirit stone grains, there were only 3 of them. One was used to stabilize the formation, and one was used to disrupt it. The third spirit stone grain directly blasted into the most obscure and weakest flaw in the formation, completely destroying the formation that had already lost its vitality. Wu Qi was rendered speechless, and he looked at Yuchen helplessly. 3 feet underground, countless twisting and winding veins that were as thin as hair could be seen, with faint natural energy flowing in them, forming a complicated network of man-made energy veins. Together with the faint star power emanating from the countless palaces above them, the apprentices of Yantian Palace were able to use these 2 systems to construct a detailed formation. It was only when the 3 brothers were constructing the formation that Wu Qi discovered that this huge underground space in the depths of Yantian Palace had its own unique secrets. Everything here was constructed for the purpose of studying the art of formations and imparting the Tao of formations to the apprentices. Countless palaces hovered above his head, following the changes of the stars in the sky. Faint waves of star power could be sensed from each of the palaces. Clearly, this was a simulated miniature celestial phenomenon map. Underneath the square, which had a circumference of 1,000 miles, were simulated miniature spirit veins. Although his cultivation base was very low, his attainment in the Tao of formations was extremely profound. Wu Qi could not help but feel a deep sense of respect as he looked at this old man, who had an old face and a wrinkled robe. Then, he turned to look at the over 100 young white-robed oracles standing around him, and found that 7 or 8 of them had golden sun patterns embroidered on their sleeves. Although this old man was only a moon oracle, he actually had a sun oracle among his apprentices. Shaking his head, which was unusually large compared to his skinny body, Elder Gaochen turned to Wu Qi and said, "It has been less than half a year since these 3 boys joined Yantian Palace. If I ask those experienced apprentices to compete with you, I'll be bullying you. If you can't defeat these 3 little guys who have just joined the sect, you can just do whatever you want to do." As for the 8 trigrams formation, it abandoned the power of the stars and the power of the earth. Instead, it relied on the small pieces of lower-grade energy stones in the 8 formation cores to draw the natural energy from the surroundings, using the 8 trigrams to generate the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. At the same time, it divided into the 8 gates of life and death, which contained 1024 miraculous transformations. If one made a mistake in one of the gates, or made a mistake in one of the transformations, the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind would explode at the same time, turning one's opponent into nothingness. As for the 9 palaces formation, it only used the power of the stars and 9 miniature altars to draw the essence star power of the 9 stars in the sky, transforming them into all kinds of strange beasts and killing people in the formation. This formation did not have many transformations, and it relied on pure power to kill people. Eventually, as more and more people arrived, the oracles at the back could no longer see what was happening in front of them. Therefore, a few old oracles simply threw out dozens of lower-grade energy stones and formed a very simple green leaf hollow formation. A subtle energy fluctuation spread out, as the formation, which was formed with dozens of lower-grade energy stones, expanded the surrounding space by hundreds of times, leaving a large space around each white-robed oracle. What a wonderful idea! The 3 teenagers looked to be only 15 or 16 years old, but the sleeves of their robes were embroidered with an exquisite pattern of a silver moon. Apparently, they were already moon oracles. Judging from their facial features, they were 70% similar, and it seemed that they were very close brothers of the same clan. Unlike the other oracles in Diyu, who specialized in all kinds of divine abilities and mystic techniques and liked to oppress others with force, the eyes of these 3 teenagers flickered with the gleam of wisdom, or as the saying goes, they kept rolling their eyeballs, which made them look very smart. After driving the 3 juniors of his clan away, Elder Gaochen came before Wu Qi and grabbed Wu Qi's wrist with a smile on his face. With a hint of fanaticism in his eyes, Elder Gaochen laughed and said, "Marquis of East Sea Province, do you want a wise and mighty master who is unparalleled in the art of formations? Do you want an elder of Yantian Palace to be your backer?" Wu Qi glanced at the great hall hovering over his head, then glanced down at the smooth square under his feet. He could not help but praise, "What a wonderful idea. This is wonderful." In this way, whether it is teaching formations or fighting with apprentices, it will be as easy and straightforward as looking at the patterns on your palm. Yu Qin, on the other hand, was staring at Wu Qi with a mysterious expression on his face. Narrowing his eyes, he said with a smile, "It suddenly occurred to me that my new wife has just given birth to a daughter. Why don't you arrange a marriage with my youngest daughter, Marquis of East Sea Province? 16 years later, she will marry you. What do you think?" These few old oracles did not possess a strong cultivation base, only at the level of 8 moon oracles and 9 moon oracles, and they did not have any cultivation base. However, their mastery of formations and space was simply amazing. They were able to operate the formations with the least amount of energy and bring out the greatest power with the simplest formation. Was this the power possessed by these old oracles of Yantian Palace? Elder Gaochen chuckled, nodded, and said, "Marquis of East Sea Province, have you also seen through the secret of this place? He, why don't you break the formation, Marquis of East Sea Province?" With his hands clasped behind his back, Yu Qin looked at the 3 young men from the Gaochen clan and said with a smile, "You have just joined Yantian Palace, and I have no idea what you have learned in the past 6 months. Just use the strongest formation you have now. Marquis of East Sea Province has trapped and killed a primordial immortal with a formation." Yu Qin chuckled, bowed slightly to the old man, and said, "Elder Gaochen, please choose 3 apprentices with the weakest cultivation base to fight with Marquis of East Sea Province." After saying that out loud, Yu Chen's lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Clearly, he was whispering something to Elder Gauchen. The formation the three Gauchen brothers had constructed was the 6-direction formation, the 8 trigrams formation, and the 9 palaces formation. The second wave of 64 spirit stones shot out, also cutting off the formation eye of the 8 trigrams formation that extracted the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Then, they rearranged a small reverse 8 gates formation inside the formation, making a mess of the spiritual energy inside the formation. The water, fire, and wind inside the small formation map turned into countless small flood dragons that soared into the sky, completely destroying the formation. The old man's cultivation base was very low, and he had 4 exquisite crescent moons embroidered on his sleeve. As a 4 moons oracle, his cultivation base was equivalent to that of a mid-grade heaven immortal. In a place like the secret palace, where high-grade oracles could be found everywhere, his overall strength was at the bottom. But when Wu Qi looked at the formation he had drawn on the ground, he was taken aback. It was not complicated, but it was extremely exquisite. Wu Qi felt that every stroke and rune in this formation, which was only about 10 feet in circumference, could be described as bloody. The 3 little fellows of the North Chen clan stared at Wu Qi with bright eyes, their noses raised high and proud, as if they were not convinced. They gave Wu Qi a death stare, then spread out. The nearby white-robed oracles flew up into the sky as well. Hundreds of white-robed oracles had their hands tucked under their sleeves, looking down at Wu Qi, Gauchen Yin, and the others. The Gauchen elder stared blankly at the 3 small formations that Wu Qi had easily destroyed. Suddenly, he sprung to his feet and kicked the 3 Gauchen brothers away. Then, he bellowed, "What a disgrace! Go and copy all 3,600 volumes of the formation scroll of unending heaven from beginning to end." It took the 3 Gauchen brothers a quarter of an hour to construct the formation, but it only took Wu Qi 3 seconds to destroy it. When the oracles of Yan Tian Palace, who were studying the variations of the formation in the distance, heard that someone was fighting the Gauchen brothers, more and more oracles rushed over. Perhaps it was because the people of Yan Tian Palace had been studying the art of formations for many years and were extremely bored, but before long, tens of thousands of oracles had swarmed over, blotting out the sky above Wu Qi's head. Wu Qi did not like Yu Chen's words. What did he mean by he had trapped a primordial immortal with a formation? He quickly explained, "Master Yu, the sovereign's immortal body and immortal soul had been severely injured, so he was killed before Tan Lang's formation could work." That was the case with the 3 Gauchen brothers' formation. Their array diagrams all relied on these 2 sets of spiritual power systems, and the largest of the 3 array diagrams was only 3 meters in radius. But, if they were expanded to correspond to real stars and underground energy veins, they would be at least tens of thousands of times larger, covering hundreds of miles, and turning into a powerful killing formation. Yu Chen waved his hand and said coolly, "What is there to explain? You are the one who killed the sovereign with the formation, aren't you?" Chapter 722. In the Yan Tian Palace of De Yu's secret palace, Wu Qi was surrounded by a few old oracles who held high positions in Yan Tian Palace, and was being bombarded by their words. Yu Chen and Elder Go Chen Mi, were among these old oracles. A group of old fellows, whose ages combined could turn a log buried underground into coal, were surrounding Wu Qi, trying to persuade Wu Qi to give up his position as the Marquis of East Sea Province and join Yan Tian Palace wholeheartedly, so that he could contribute to the development of the Tao of Formations and contribute his youth and life to De Yu's Yan Tian Palace. According to Go Chenmi, it would be better for Wu Qi to contribute his youth and his children, so that his children and grandchildren, as long as they had an aptitude in the Tao of Formations, would have to join Yan Tian Palace and become a part of it. With a bitter face, Wu Qi accepted the bombardment of these old fellows, holding a cup of tea in his hand and drinking it non-stop. It was not until now that he realized that these masters and elders of the secret palace were all mad scientists, and they did not even know much about the ways of the world. They were the outliers in the conservative and closed nation of De Yu. All their minds were immersed in the endless knowledge they were interested in, and their life was to live for the things they were interested in. They were a group of very pure people. For example, These old fellows from Yantian Palace lived for the sake of the Tao of formations, and they burned their lives for the sake of the Tao of formations. Apart from the Tao of formations, they knew nothing else. Any novel formation would cheer them up, and any talented newcomer who appeared in front of them would do everything in their power to recruit him into the Yantian Palace. Take Wu Qi for example. These old fellows wondered why a genius like him, who could break 3 formations in such a short time, would want to be the Marquis of East Sea Province. If Wu Qi were to join Yantian Palace, they could immediately make Wu Qi their imperial oracle, which would be a very noble position in the imperial court of Diyu, and would be even more honorable than those princes. Go Chenmi grabbed Wu Qi's hand and kept talking to Wu Qi about the significance of joining Yantian Palace. Yu Chen, on the other hand, was holding Wu Qi's hand and telling Wu Qi how beautiful the wife he had taken in at the behest of the Yu clan in Liangzhu was, and how beautiful and lovely the daughter she had given birth to was. He promised that as long as Wu Qi joined Yantian Palace, he would immediately marry his daughter to Wu Qi. Although his daughter was still suckling at the moment, as long as Wu Qi waited patiently for 16 years, or 11 or 12 years, he would be able to have a beautiful wife. Yu Chen was enthusiastically discussing with the elders around him how likely it was that the child born to Wu Qi and his daughter would have an excellent aptitude in the field of formations. These elders of Yantian Palace firmly believed that the aptitude in the field of formations, like all other aptitudes, could be inherited through bloodline. As the first master of Yantian Palace, Yu Chen's aptitude in the field of formations went without saying. As a genius who could break 3 formations in such a short time, Wu Qi's bloodline was excellent as well. With such excellent bloodlines, he would definitely be able to give birth to more excellent offspring, and in that way, Yantian Palace would have more excellent new blood. One of the old oracles grinned, revealing his gums, which were missing a few teeth, and said, "It's just like breeding livestock. As long as both the father and mother are good, they will be able to give birth to good livestock." "That's a great idea, master." With a loud crack, Wu Qi bit off a piece of his cup. If he did not know that these old oracles were pure academic lunatics, he would have thought that they were mocking him on purpose. How could they talk like that? Wasn't it just to make him join Yantian Palace? Yu Chen had even listed out his own daughter as a condition. Poor heavens, his daughter was only a month old. Clenching his teeth, Wu Qi shook his head firmly, determined not to agree to these old oracles' request to join Yantian Palace. Was he going to give up his family and friends, his territory, and all his plans just to join Yantian Palace? Was he going to spend the rest of his life studying the art of formations in this dark place? Was Wu Qi out of his mind or an idiot? Wu Qi did not want to become as crazy as Yu Chen, Go Chenmi, and the other old fellows. After wasting several hours of saliva, Wu Qi finally managed to escape unscathed under the bombardment of these crazy old fellows. Seeing that Wu Qi was determined not to join Yantian Palace, Yu Chen and the other old oracles gave up on the idea. Go Chen and the other elders and great oracles sighed helplessly, staring at Wu Qi from head to toe for a full quarter of an hour with a look that seemed to say, "Why would a beautiful man become a thief?" Only then did they rise to their feet and return excitedly to their apprentices, where they began to teach them the secrets of various formations. Yu Chen stared at Wu Qi for a while with a very strange and resentful look in his eyes. Finally, he sighed, grabbed the teacup from Wu Qi's hand, and threw it to the ground. Then, he picked up Wu Qi and said in a deep voice, "Forget it, forget it. What else do I have to say for you to waste God's gift and abandon yourself? Now, come with me." With his hands clasped behind his back, Yu Chen led Wu Qi through the square where Yantian Palace studied formations with a gloomy face. They went around a thick rock wall and came to the front of a pitch-black hall at the back of the square. The hall was carved out of a mountain, and was surrounded by a vast open space. A faint mist hovered a few inches above the ground, making the hall look very mysterious. Looking at the hall, Wu Qi felt that its length, width, and height, as well as the patterns on its surface, were all in accordance with the mysteries of the heavens, including the height and diameter of the 36 stone pillars standing in front of the door, and the seemingly natural spots on them. Everything formed a perfect organic whole. This hall was like a living being that was in deep slumber. It lay there silently, yet contained an extremely great aura of danger. This is the place where Yantian Palace keeps all the books of formations. Yuchen looked at the hall and sighed. Why don't you think about it carefully? The Marquis of East Sea Province is just a title. How can it compare to the happiness brought by studying the Tao of formations? You can ask your loyal and reliable subordinates to take care of everything in your territory, and all you have to do is to stay in Yantian Palace and study the mysteries of formations with all your heart. Wu Qi did not say a word. He just looked at Yu Chen with a smile. Yu Chen heaved a long sigh and said, "You, Tan Lang, were born in the wilderness, and you're just an ordinary man. But, you've obtained the diagrams of formations left by the immortals, and you're able to comprehend all kinds of profound formations from them. You have an amazing talent, and Gao Chen Yin and his two brothers have been wholeheartedly trained by the Gao Chen clan since they were young. Half a year ago, they joined Yantian Palace, and they are the most talented disciples we've recruited over the years." Yu Chen turned to look at Wu Qi and said in a soft voice, "Although they are young, they have been immersed in the Tao of formations for 10 years, and they have extraordinary insight and experience. I can't believe that the formations they constructed with all their heart and soul were destroyed by you with just a flick of your finger. With your talent and perception, it will be a pity if you don't join Yantian Palace." Wu Qi still did not say a word. He was not interested in being an old pedant. Although he was interested in the various profound mysteries of formations in Yantian Palace, he had absolutely no interest in becoming a member of Yantian Palace. Although they were already standing before the door of countless ancient books, Yu Chen did not bring Wu Qi into the hall. He just stood in front of the door and kept murmuring, repeating the words of those old oracles over and over again. He was basically saying that if Wu Qi did not join Yantian Palace, it would be a waste of his talent, and he would be irresponsible for his own talents. But to be honest, although Yu Chen and the others had unfathomable cultivation bases, their eloquence was too weak. Their feeble words could never convince Wu Qi. Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh as he watched Yu Chen waste his saliva. "Old man Yu, there are countless secrets of the Tao of formations in Yantian Palace, but why was King Gao unable to find a way to deal with the formations constructed by those immortals when he attacked Myriad Immortal Alliance? Is it because there are no experts in formations in Du?" Yu Chen was rendered speechless. He blinked and said with a frown, "Yantian Palace is only responsible for studying the Tao of formations, but these..." Yu Chen pursed his lips and did not say a word. Did Gao have the face to ask these great oracles of Yantian Palace who were obsessed with the Tao of formations to fight for Gao's army? The secret palace was independent of Du. Apart from these noble oracles of Yantian Palace, who else in the outside world could obtain the research results of Yantian Palace? Who would dare to ask the human emperor for the secret manuals of formations in Yantian Palace? Wu Qi gave a cold snort and said sarcastically, "Yantian Palace studies the Tao of formations, but even though they have come up with countless essences of formations, no one has put them into practice. Who knows if these formations are really effective? Are they really perfect? Are all kinds of fantastic ideas really appropriate? If there is no practical way to verify them, even if Tan Lang joins Yantian Palace, what benefit can he bring to Yantian Palace?" Yu Chen frowned and looked thoughtfully at Wu Qi. No one had ever said these words to him. Wu Qi looked at Yu Chen with a serious expression and said in a deep voice, "I, Tan Lang, am so bold as to ask Master to give me all the secrets of Yantian Palace. I'll definitely try them one by one and make up for the flaws of Yantian Palace." With a sudden thought, Wu Qi plagiarized a saying in a very serious and solemn manner, "Master, as the saying goes, practice is the only criterion to test the truth." Yu Chen shook his head, and his deep eyes shone with a bright gleam. He stared at Wu Qi in surprise, then suddenly burst into laughter and said, "Wonderful. You've revealed the secrets of heaven with just a few words. No wonder I've been feeling that Yantian Palace has come to an end all these years, and that the Tao of formations can no longer make any progress. It turns out that, after pondering for a long while with narrowed eyes, Yuchen pulled Wuqi and walked into the great hall. Tan Lang, I'll give you all the secrets of this palace. Feel free to use them, but remember not to let them fall into the hands of outsiders. I'll make an exception and promise you that if you make any new discoveries in the Tao of Formations in the future, you can come to Yen Tian Palace and discuss them with me. What do you think? It was one thing for Yuchen to give Wuqi all the secrets of Yen Tian Palace, but he also promised that if Wuqi had any new discoveries in the Tao of Formations, he could come to Yen Tian Palace and discuss them with him. Wuqi's eyes lit up. Perhaps, Yuchen just wanted to find another way to make Wuqi a member of Yen Tian Palace. But, how many extra benefits did he bring to Wuqi? He had really made a fortune. Chapter 723. At the entrance of the secret palace, the oracle who stopped Wuqi from taking Ao Buzan and the dragon python sisters was sitting cross-legged under a stone pillar outside the secret palace. The dragon python sisters were quietly coiled up together. Their bodies had shrunk to only a foot long, and they were cautiously glancing left and right, full of curiosity about everything in the secret palace. Ao Buzan, on the other hand, was lying on his stomach on the ground, cursing the oracle's ancestors at the top of his voice. Just now, Wuqi had tied Ao Buzan's mouth with his own body, but it didn't take Ao Buzan much effort to untie the complicated bowknot on his mouth. After that, he began to get restless. He would either criticize the few female oracles who occasionally went in and out of the secret palace, or he would always try to sneak into the secret palace to find some benefits. The oracle in charge of keeping Ao Buzan and the other two oracles was annoyed by Ao Buzan. Although most of the oracles in the secret palace had a bad temper, even a clay bodhisattva would get angry when provoked. When Ao Buzan tried to sneak into the secret palace for the 37th time using an escape technique and an illusion technique, the oracle took out a talisman and pressed it on Ao Buzan's body, firmly suppressing him. Lying straight on the ground, Ao Buzan could only move his mouth and eyes, but he could not move his body at all. He could not even lift his claws. Furious, Ao Buzan began to curse the oracle's ancestors, but the oracle just sat cross-legged under the stone pillar and turned a deaf ear to Ao Buzan. Just as Ao Buzan kept cursing, an incomparably old great oracle came to the entrance of the secret palace along the long stone steps with dozens of white-robed oracles. When the old oracle heard Ao Buzan's cursing, he glanced over in the direction of the voice. Abruptly, he came to an abrupt halt, stared at Ao Buzan with gleaming eyes, and said with a smile, "Black Dragon. Five-clawed Black Dragon." Looking at the shape of his scales, he seemed to be a pure-blooded descendant of the primordial five-clawed Black Dragon God King. Strange, is there still a Black Dragon with such a pure bloodline? He smacked his lips and looked at the dragon python sisters. He clapped his hands and praised, "Wonderful. Dragon pythons, and the most ferocious among the dragon pythons, the soaring dragon pythons of fire and ice. Oh my, legend has it that the internal organs and blood of dragon pythons of fire and ice can be used to make supreme-grade spiritual medicines, and their bones, scales, and skin can be used to craft supreme-grade magical artifacts. Wow, how wonderful." The old oracle and the dozens of oracles behind him were all clad in the standard white robe of the secret palace. However, a ferocious pattern was embroidered on his chest with blood-red threads, which was very different from the star pattern on Yuchen's chest. The pattern on his chest was that of a strange-shaped bone spike pierced into the skull of a fiend god with 6 horns, and a twisting blood-red vine growing out of the skull's mouth. The long vine coiled around the bone spike a few times, then bloomed into a gorgeous blood-red flower near the handle of the bone spike, with a ferocious, twisted face of a fiend god in the pistil, laughing evilly. He was Wuchang Qi, the first master of the Thousand Spirit Palace, one of the branches of the Secret Palace, and an elder of the Wuchang clan of the Deyu Directorate of Celestials. The Wuchang clan was now the holder of the right oracle of the Deyu Directorate of Celestials, and had a very high prestige in the system of the Deyu Directorate of Celestials, or rather, the oracles of Deyu. It was an important clan that held real power. Today, the Baihuang clan of Deyu held the position of the Grand Oracle, and together with the Gaochen clan and the Wuchang clan, they were known as the three great divine Magus clans of Deyu. The Wuchang clan ranked third among the three clans, and its members were particularly fond of studying some evil spells and mystic arts of the Ghost Dao. The Thousand Spirit Palace, which was presided by Wuchang Qi, was one such palace that specialized in all kinds of evil mystic arts. The oracles of the Thousand Spirit Palace liked to play all kinds of grafting tricks. For example, they would chop off the head of an azure dragon and place it on the neck of a black tortoise to see if the newborn azure dragon or black tortoise could possess both the mighty magic power of the azure dragon and the bloodline magic of the black tortoise. Or, they would place the heads of a fire phoenix and an ice phoenix on the neck of a blue swan to see if the newborn strange creature could possess both the elements of ice and fire, and if it could control the power of wind while breathing fire and ice. Or, they would force the people of Longbow Kingdom to copulate with the feather men, and take all kinds of mystic medicines while they were having sex, to see if they could give birth to a brand new race with wings and huge bodies. They had also forced all kinds of demons who had cultivated their human forms to copulate with each other, hoping to breed some powerful and fresh demons. As for ethics and principles, they had no such concept. For veteran oracles like Wuchang Qi, the happiest thing for them was to find some strange experimental subjects, especially those bloodlines that had gone extinct in the ancient times, which were rare and precious treasures that they could only dream of. Whenever they found a rare experimental subject, they would never listen to the opinions of the subject. Instead, they would bring the subject into the Thousand Spirit Palace with threats, promises, and even violence, and then, most of the time, the experimental subjects that were brought into the Thousand Spirit Palace never showed up again. Once, when an apprentice oracle of the Thousand Spirit Palace was chatting with an apprentice from a branch palace, he accidentally mentioned that the stewed dragon tendon was very chewy, and the honeyed phoenix wings were very sweet and delicious. When Wuchang Qi saw Ao Buzan, he almost drooled, and when he saw the dragon python sisters, his body began to tremble violently. The pure-blooded descendants of the supreme royal clan of the ancient black dragons, the descendants of the extinct dragon pythons of fire and ice. How precious these three experimental subjects were, and how excellent the food was. Wuchang Qi patted his belly and thought, let's not talk about the food first. I should bring these three experimental subjects back first, pull out their tendons, and skin them. Or, I can force them to copulate with each other. According to the legends, the bloodline of dragon pythons was extremely strong, and the offspring born from the copulation of any flood dragon and a dragon python would be the descendant of the dragon python. So, what would the offspring of the royal bloodline of the ancient black dragons be? Black dragons of fire and ice? At the thought of the endless possibilities, Wuchang Qi felt his cold blood suddenly burning, and his dead heart suddenly became extremely feverish. In his long life, he had killed all the living creatures that could be found on Panga continent, but now, he had suddenly found a new target. Ancient black dragons, dragon pythons of fire and ice. He decided that he would slowly train these three experimental subjects this time, and he would have to cook them for at least 10,000 years. Laughing strangely, Wuchang Qi, who was only about 4 feet tall, skinny as a stick, and had 2 hands that looked like chicken claws, swaggered over to Xiang Ao. Shaking his huge head, he laughed strangely and said, "Come, come. Hee hee, what a cute little black dragon you are. Hee hee, come, raise your buttocks and let me see if you are a male or a female." Ao Buzan, who was cursing the oracle next to him, shouted angrily, "Is it a male or a female? Old fool, do you think Lao Tzu is a female dragon? You bastard, your parents must have tied you up in the wrong direction when they gave birth to you, and fed you with your buttocks instead of your head. Otherwise, why would you ask if Lao Tzu is a male or a female?" Wuchang Qi laughed shrilly, waving his hands and feet excitedly as he said, You are so energetic. This little guy is so lively. How fresh. TSK, how long is your true form? Later, I'll cut a few kilograms of your black dragon meat and fry it in a wok of oil. You are the royal descendant of the ancient black dragon clan, the taste is really The middle-aged oracle who was in charge of keeping Aobuzin and his companions opened his eyes abruptly and jumped to his feet. As soon as he saw Wu Changqi, his pupils constricted to the size of a needle tip, and he screamed in horror as cold sweat broke out from his forehead. Grabbing Aobuzin and the dragon python sisters, the oracle cried out sternly, "Patriarch Wu Chang, this is a flood dragon and 2 dragon pythons, they are." Wu Changqi's body swayed, and before anyone could see his movement clearly, the middle-aged oracle was thrown flying backward while coughing up a mouthful of blood. Falling from the top of the tens of miles high stone steps leading to the entrance of the secret palace, the middle-aged oracle was thrown tens of miles deep into the air. While still in mid-air, he was knocked unconscious and fell heavily to the ground, with at least 80% of his bones broken. After knocking away the unlucky fellow who got in his way with a punch, Wu Changqi grabbed Aobuzin by the neck and intimately stuck out his pale green tongue to lick Aobuzin's face. His stinking saliva was smeared all over Aobuzin's face, and Wu Changqi cried out in ecstasy, "What a pure aura of a black dragon! TSK, TSK. Those hybrid black dragons nowadays are nothing compared to him. What a fresh and sweet taste." It had always been Aobuzin who ate others, and when had he ever been licked by someone like a food ingredient? Aobuzin trembled with rage and roared furiously. But, the talisman on his back was too powerful, and he could not move at all, let alone resist any of Wu Changqi's actions. After licking Aobuzin's face a few times, Wu Changqi cast a furtive glance at the dragon python sisters, who were still clutched in the middle of their bodies. Laughing evilly, Wu Changqi stuck out his tongue and tried to lick the sisters. But suddenly, the sisters, whose bodies had shrunk to only a foot long, let out unpleasant dragon roars at the same time. Then, their bodies expanded rapidly, and in just a blink of an eye, they had transformed into 2 gigantic dragon pythons, each measuring a few miles long and hundreds of feet thick. Accompanied by the deafening dragon roars, one of the sisters opened her mouth and held Aobuzin in it, while the other opened her mouth and shot out a silver torrent that enveloped Wu Changqi and all the oracles of the Thousand Spirit Palace around him. Since the beginning of time, ever since the secret palace of Deyu was founded, not even during the cultivation tribulation, not even when the celestial emperor of the celestial court and the human emperor of Deyu fell. But, no fight had ever taken place in front of Deyu's secret palace. But today, the ferocious dragon python sisters had struck. A silver torrent shot out and knocked Wu Changqi and the dozens of disciples behind him flying away, while countless xian bing sprayed out of the silver light and crumbled the cliffs around the secret palace, destroying a large number of the exquisitely carved statues. A muffled alarm rang out as the alarm system of the secret palace was activated. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.